from the beginning.
And I was shown that that Lucifer would return, that the UN and the Vatican were going to be completely behind it, again, under false pretenses. He's going to show up and say, I'm here to save the day, right? And, okay, fine, you know.
Yeah, of course,
ahead,
you can say whatever you want.
But
I've always hated censorship. It's the internet.
Sometimes, you know, once they get you for your first love bite, well, it depends on how aware you are, right?
I forgot my bullets. I never had a gun. Here I am left standing. Am I the only one? For what I see, memories have guilted me. I'll never see the sun.
First of all, as you know, the Anunnaki and the Draco are enemies. Second of all, underneath Baghdad was a stargate that was created by the Anunnaki so that they could transfer from Jupiter to the Earth.
I'll never see the sun. I could just end it all, but the demons will have won.
Magical practitioners that, you know, some are good and some use their magic for good and to heal and to help, and others do use it for evil. And, you know, in some cases, you know, people really were.
This is too much sometimes. From the broken ruins of Babylon, this is End of Days Radio. I am your host, Daniel, broadcasting to you all the way from the shimmering Emerald City, right here in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Today's date is December 7th, 2017. And I am Daniel, in case you forgot. This is a show for those that just don't seem to fit in normal society. You punk rockers, you beboppers, you rebels, you people out there that just don't want to conform. You people out there that have that rebellious spirit in your heart. Those of you out there that have always known deep down that there's something wrong with the world. This is where we explore such wild accusations, but this is a show much different than any other because on here we truly do not give a fuck. We just don't. We don't care. We're not trying to be this or that. We want to be the anti-everything here on End of Days Radio. We are the anti-everything. We're not about big business. We're not about making money. We are about spreading chaos, spreading disorder, and bringing that evil, corrupt system down to the ground. Okay, enough megalomania for me. Today's show, we have a very special guest. Bruce R. Fenton is the author of the Revolutionary Humans Origins ebook series, The Forgotten Exodus. He was born in the historic English town of, I hope I pronounced this right, Cheltenham, England. He graduated from Anglia Ruskin University in 2002, having studied information systems. Fenton is a world traveler and public speaker. His research activities have featured in the UK's Telegraph newspaper and on a popular Science Channel show. He is a current member of both the Paleoanthropology Society and the Scientific and Medical Network. So some heavy credentials there. And I will be calling him in a couple minutes. I did want to talk a little bit about endofdaysradio.com. Remember, you can go to endofdaysradio.com for all things End of Days Radio. If you want to know the schedule, if you want to know more about me, if you want to leave some feedback, if you want to discuss something in the forum, remember to go to endofdaysradio.com. You can get my Twitter on there, my email, everything about End of Days Radio, everything about me is at endofdaysradio.com. Also, the last show, there was quite a bit of feedback, much of it very positive and some very negative, and we're going to get into that after the break, so please stay tuned after our interview. I'm going to go ahead and dial up our guest. Hello.
Hi there, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Bruce. How are you?
Pretty well. Is my sound quality okay? I'll just check. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds fantastic. Better than most people.
Awesome. That's good. We just finally got higher speed internet in the area in Australia where I am. It took them a while, but so yeah, hopefully it should be fairly stable. So,
it had to happen eventually.
Eventually, yeah. It's a big country, so you can imagine that the rollout is taking years for them to actually cover the whole country. But
there are advantages as well if you live in Australia. For example, it's very warm.
Yes, we do have good weather. I mean, now it's just the start of it's heading towards summer, so it's getting hot. So, and also I'm using a decent quality mic, so that probably helps. I mean, I have one of those, a Yeti Blue mic.
Oh, that is a fantastic mic.
So that's probably another reason, because you get a lot of people that are using, their phone or using, whatever it is they've managed to find in the local shop. So yeah, hopefully my quality should be right. Where are you based?
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
The shimmering Emerald City.
How long have you been doing your show then? A while? Or?
Yeah, quite a while now. It's been a good probably 5 years of getting deep into all of these interesting topics, and it's really exciting because here I am at the forefront of some of this amazing information that's rolling out. I just feel like the luckiest guy in the world sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you get to hear obviously directly from a lot of people that are doing, interesting things or having interesting experiences. It's another from the novel things of doing podcasts and radio shows and stuff in it. So, you get to, hear it first and question it first, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. And being on the internet, it gives me so much freedom. We can talk about anything that we want. If there's a different perspective on history, about human origins, there's nobody here to block us. I mean, maybe the bad side is that you have a lot of nonsense out there on the internet, but I think the freedom that it offers is just incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you take that back 20 years, so it just, wasn't really like that. So yeah, no, it's lucky. Yeah. And the only trouble is, I guess, is getting people to be critically thinking, as you say, so they can weed out some of that other stuff. But apart from that, though, yeah, it's great that the choice of information is there, the whole smorgasbord of data. And I can access things for my research that, I would have to have gone to all the libraries across Europe and the US and it's insane in the past when, to get the same information. For a study like mine, I would have been traveling the world, going to museums and libraries and, meeting academics. So yeah, I'm quite fortunate that I can just log on, and find articles.
Well, we've got a lot to get into here, but what I usually like to do at the beginning is to talk just a little bit about you and your background. If you wouldn't mind,
sure.
I'd love to hear about perhaps where you grew up, what it was like, or maybe maybe how did this start, this extreme interest in the archaeology and the human origins? Where did it all begin?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely give you a bit of a an overview of that, how that's come about, and which in itself is a story, and I've covered a few. I mean, I've been covering all sorts of topics over the years in the ancient mysteries and paranormal. So I mean, it's my interests go far and wide, put it that way.
Excellent, and I do want to get into as much of that stuff as possible. I've even heard you speak about giants, so I definitely would like to talk about that before we're finished as well.
Sure. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to grab a glass of water from the bathroom, which is next to me. So just because my throat's gone a little bit croaky, so just a moment.
Well, heck, usually most hosts would probably do some kind of commercial or talk right now, but I think I'll have a little water myself. Cheers.
Okay, that's better.
All right.
Yeah, so yeah, I can give you some of that. You know, the overview of the giants connection there, and probably the two main expeditions that are relevant there is the Ecuadorian Amazon megalithic site that I was involved with, and also going up into the Caucasus in Georgia with the Science Channel to find giant bones. So we can, you know, I can mention both of those, you know, in that beginning bit if you like, or wherever it fits in with you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's why don't we start by talking a little bit about you, and then I'd like to talk about this article that you sent me.
Okay, sure.
So how did it all begin?
Well, for me, I had an interest in ancient mysteries and the paranormal from when I was very young, about 11 years old. My grandmother was giving me these little cards that came free with her tea that she would buy. It was collectible cards, and there was a set called Ancient Mysteries of the World. And within that, it had crystal skulls, you know, the pyramids, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, you know, the spheres of these giant spheres. I forget where they are now, but there was, you know, all of these a wide range of mysteries were covered on. I think it's a set of about 40 cards, and obviously some of the most famous ancient mysteries and some of the paranormal mysteries, and that really just, you know, it really sort of resonated with me as something, you know, really fascinating to get into. So, I mean, I'm 41 now, so I mean, it's been, you know, quite a long journey, you know, sort of 30 years of interest in this area, and in diverse areas, but anything a little bit off kilter, you know, a little bit strange. So that's really where it began. So it's been a long journey.
Well, you're 41. You still have so much time. You are very young still, Bruce.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, we're living in an age now where who knows, we might be able to live on into our hundreds or more with, you know, advances in, you know, medical technology and all the rest of that. If it's shared with everyone and not just kept for the wealthy, of course. But yeah, I should hopefully have some time to make a few more interesting discoveries yet. I mean, you know, obviously from 11 years old, I wasn't doing an awful lot of in-depth research, but yeah, you know, the last 20 odd years, I've certainly been sort of fully engaged with that, you know, process of really going out there and finding things. And
yeah, so it's so awesome that you had somebody there, a mentor figure that was into something paranormal or alternate history related. I'm sure you feel quite lucky to have had your grandmother there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a good thing. And also she used to write, and she wrote ghost stories and had a number of paranormal experiences herself. And so, I mean, you know, I think that influence was there, you know, because my dad would, you know, my dad's mother, he would sort of tell me some of these stories that she had passed on to him as well. And the fact that, yeah, she gave me these collectible cards, which obviously spurred that interest, you know. Yeah, it's, you know, so I guess I had that contact with these subjects at a younger age than most people would have, thanks to that. So yeah, I do appreciate that. I had a head start, you know, in being open-minded to these kind of subjects. And also, you know, I have to credit my dad, who was quite, not really a conspiracy theorist, but he certainly was aware of conspiracies that had gone on, and didn't have a very, you know, atypical view of the world, you know, that he would tell me about, you know, the CIA manipulation in South America, and the, you know, the Contra rebels affairs, and the smuggling of cocaine by the CIA. You know, so he was very aware on these things. So I also grew up with that, like, kind of alternative perspective compared to what the news and, you know, mainstream history would have told you, which generally filters out the bit where there's mass corruption, you know, whereas he would tell me about these things, you know. So I've had those influences in the family, yeah, which have definitely influenced me and allowed me to have that, you know, open-minded pursuit of the truth.
Is your dad still alive?
He is, yeah, and he still maintains those interests. You know, he's a guy that would happily sit and talk to you about, you know, the holes in the story of, you know, 9/11 or you know, the banking manipulations and stuff. So yeah, he maintains an interest in these kind of these topic areas. You know, certainly in the more, you know, I guess the more mainstream, well-known ones. You know, he's not an ancient mysteries researcher by any stretch, but certainly, yeah, has a very critical eye when it comes to news stories that come out.
Yeah, that's very awesome to have somebody there that's not brainwashed by the system, so to speak, because so much of us are just trapped inside of that box.
Absolutely, and it makes a big difference when you're starting off. If you've got, obviously the system brainwashing you through your family who have accepted that earlier brainwashing. So, I mean, I've been fortunate, and I think I can put down a lot of my early achievements to that, to that fact that I wasn't conditioned in the same way. So yeah, it's allowed me from a very early age to start, looking at these subjects and taking them, with an open-minded sort of seriousness rather than just dismissing them because, people think silly, So yeah, that's made an enormous difference. And yeah, I think it's allowed me to make some of the, the connections and revelations, that I've managed to do so far.
Did you ever look into the whole crystal skull thing?
Yeah, I've had a look into that subject. I do think that there are ancient crystal skulls. I do recognise that there are a number of, fake ones. But I also think there's a difficulty there because you can't directly date crystal skulls. I mean, you can look on the surface of them and you can see the type of machining and the kind of rubbing that's been done. And obviously that can indicate when they were made. But that's not, fully an accurate way of dating them or saying whether they're ancient or modern. I mean, we're now seeing that there was, rapid, sort of high-speed drilling used in the past, going back perhaps as far as 70,000 years ago, with some of the artifacts found in Siberia at the Denisova cave, which again, so if we're looking at saying that people were doing kind of rapid drilling 70,000 years ago, and we're looking at the surface of one of these skulls, and we say, well, look, it looks like it's been machined in some way. Well, hang on a minute. We're now saying that, that there's some kind of, rapid drill technology being used that early, on. So then perhaps some of these skulls that we've assumed were made with a modern technology were actually made with ancient technologies we'd failed to recognize. So that's, another whole subject in itself, which I suspect that we're going to have to revisit that crystal skull subject in light of the findings at the Denisova cave.
Were you into the Indiana Jones movies?
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah, I like them. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't think there's many archaeologists out there today that are living quite that lifestyle. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have been inspired by that, if we're honest. I mean, we all, certainly in our kind of age group, grew up with that, with those films, and a lot of the archaeologists out there in the mainstream, do make their memes and jokes around, the Indiana Jones kind of saga. And yeah, obviously there's some truth in that. We know the Nazis were out there looking for all sorts of strange stuff, mounting expeditions into the Caucasus and into the Tibetan mountains and stuff, that looking for these ancient relics and stuff. So, and on the other side, obviously, various secret services of the world taking interest in that, to see what they were doing. So, I mean, there is underneath that kind of fantastical, view of it, there is a lot of truth behind those films, in terms of what was really going on in terms of ancient mysteries research and the paranormal investigations and how the governments and, scientists and stuff have been sort of covertly involved with that.
Yeah, we're given a very cookie cutter, very rigid view of our origins in school and in religion as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I suppose when it comes down to it, they think, we have to, history, there's an argument for whether history should, in some respects, even be taught in school level, because you have to condense down so much information into such a small, selective, sort of cherry-picked version to fit it into a school curriculum, and then that becomes history, for so many young people. They think, well, that's history, that's what I've learned. But, that minuscule slice of it, which is then, as I say, cherry-picked and chosen to produce the best worker or member of society, is definitely a direct form of brainwashing, in my opinion. And I think that perhaps, children at school are not really even ready to fully investigate history in a sensible way. And it should maybe be a topic for their families or for them as they're older to explore, rather than an authority figure coming in and saying, this is history, this little bit here, this little bit here, and this is all you need to know. So I don't know. I have, some thoughts on that in the way it's taught, because, when you look back and you remember what you learned at school, and then you contrast that against, what you maybe have learned as an adult by researching yourself, you can really see how misleading, the history you were taught was.
Was there a point in your youth where you really realized that there was a whole world of things to discover, kind of behind what we're taught, that we really didn't know where we came from? Did you have like an aha moment like that?
I suppose in some ways, for me, that's grown out of my involvement with what I would call, paranormal or supernormal experience. From quite an early age, my early teens, I was experiencing odd phenomena, what I'd call psychic, telepathic, and strange experiences. Certainly for myself, I would say that questioned the nature of consciousness, questioned the nature of reality. I also explored psychedelics. At a relatively young age, there was the rave scene in the UK back in the 1990s, which I was sort of involved with, traveling the country, going to illegal raves and partying and, meeting lots of people and taking various compounds and experiencing consciousness in a different way. So I think that those two factors probably combined to give me an open mind to the broader picture of what it is to be human, and leading from that, again, building on my earlier exposure to ancient mysteries, it really provoked that thinking of whether or not perhaps there was also an awful lot being covered up or suppressed or not understood in terms of our human journey. So I suppose in some ways my aha moment, started coming out of that, rather than directly finding a site. But I mean, I think like most people out there, the Pyramid of Egypt would be one of those that I would say was a bit of an aha moment, where you think, well, hang on, when you understand, what's gone into this structure, the levels of, accuracy, the information it seems to encode, it's hard not to say, well, hang on a minute, this is not adding up to what we're being told about, human cultures 5,000 years ago, compared to what we're seeing in structures like that. So I think perhaps that I would say that, the Great Pyramid was one of those catalysts for me to really revisit that story we've been told.
And you mentioned a moment ago that you had some psychic experiences. I just can't help but be very interested in that, because I myself, I tend to, I really put the idea out there that this psychic stuff, the ESP, the higher powers of the human consciousness, they're very real. So I would love to know would you share a little bit more about that? Did something happen? Did you read about it? What was your experience with psychic connections or ESP?
Well, I'll tell you one that was that certainly did catalyze some of my research, and that was an experience I had back in, well, it would have been around about 2001. And I was at the time, I was exploring, a deeper understanding of survival of the spirit and life after death. And I had become involved with a website which was connected to a spiritualist, learning centre in Wales. I mean, I'm from the UK, I'm from England. But there was a website that called Half Annie Coed, which is, as I say, is a spiritualist union website. We have something in the UK called the National Spiritualist Union, basically, which deals with, mediumship and has a range of spiritualist churches across the country, just for people who are not familiar with that. So I was on the website, I'd use their chat forum and I'd talk to mediums and other people that were just interested in the subject. And on one occasion, I was having an online text chat with another member who I had conversations with over a period of time and had come to know as a bit of a friend. In the middle of this conversation, anyway, I had this sudden, very strange experience, which was one moment I'm typing, on the computer. The next moment, I am flying through the air above a jungle, fully vivid, full color, fully immersive experience. I'm flying. I'm not sure I have a body, but it feels that I'm there bodily. I didn't look at myself. I was looking at what was ahead of me. And I was flying across this jungle, and then I could see this white, gleaming white stepped pyramid ahead of me. Now I could recognize.
You're not going to believe it, people. Skype just crashed. You talk about certain subjects and things go haywire, and it happens way too much. Hello, Bruce.
Hi there. I think I lost you as I was flying over the jungle, I think.
yeah, that might be what happened, but I have a long history of strange electronic interference and errors on this show, and it's never anything on my end. It just happens when we talk about the really interesting
you
stuff.
sort of vanished from Skype for a moment there, but perhaps it was too sensitive for some people. But I think you got up to there where, yes, essentially there was I saw a stepped pyramid ahead of me, but gleaming white, so it looked to me brand new. Which is a sort of a key point, because obviously anyone who's been to Mesoamerica and seen the pyramids, whether in, Mexico and the region, knows that they're grey and decrepit, and collapsing. So it was quite apparent to me that this was a new pyramid I was seeing. And as I approached it, I had a knowing about this site. I knew that there was a secret tunnel in the top. I knew that there was a hidden village nearby that I wasn't seeing, and that this was a kind of a beacon for these people who I couldn't see visibly. I also was aware that there was a man on top of the pyramid who was in I would call sort of, I guess, native looking clothes, not wearing very much, gesticulating and doing something, holding a staff. I didn't recall him actually, being able to hear anything. It was all a very visual experience. But it was obviously he was saying something or doing something there. And then as quick as it had started, really, it was like bang, and then I was back, in my body, sitting at my desk, obviously astonished, it was I'd had previous strange experiences, but that was one of the most profound. And at that point, I sort of typed to the person I'd been talking to and said, look, I've just had this really intense experience. And she actually replied and said, I know. She said, I was there, flying over the jungle, and she said, and I also got additional information, including that it was the 7th century. She said it was 675 AD, and that the experience had been meant for me rather than for her, which is what she picked up. And she was also a person with intuitive experiences herself. So it was astonishing in that not only did I have that experience, but someone else, sitting at their desk, wherever they were, also had the experience concurrently, the same visual experience, and was able to get additional information. And that actually began for me an intense period of research into the civilizations of Mesoamerica, particularly the Maya, who I felt that this was a Mayan temple. And I created a website called 2012rising.com, which ran for about 7 years. Over 1 million visitors, all through the whole period of the Mayan calendar countdown. Interacted with all kinds of people through that. Went to Mexico, went to the sites, so it was a whole big journey. So you say one of the catalysts in my research was certainly that psychic experience, which absolutely did change the direction of my life, pitting me into the fray of the whole Mayan calendar subject for all those years. So yeah, absolutely. It's had a big, profound impact.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds almost as if you were given some sort of message or direction to go in.
Absolutely, and I can see looking back, as the journey has continued. I mean, I have since come to understand, a lot more about that experience and why it happened, why it had to happen, and that the journey has flowed on from there with the Mayans and on to other related civilizations, who I now understand how they were related, through my other work more recently. So yeah, at the time, although it was it just seemed like a disjointed fragment, and really hard to place into context as to why, I now do, I do have a good understanding of why that happened. But yeah, it does show that for me, the psychic and the scientific, if you like, the mundane, going through papers and studies, the two have both been very important for my research. And I don't have a problem with, I understand that there's academics who would just dismiss the psychic experiences. But the bottom line is they've helped me bring up information which has been tested and proven to be accurate. So I don't really care if people dismiss that.
And it sounds, based on what you said earlier, that psychedelics as well may have played a part in your journey.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And, more latterly, I spent 5 years in Ecuador, almost 6 years in Ecuador, where I was involved with sort of shamanic learning, shamanic experience there, including journeys with both San Pedro and with ayahuasca. And those have also been important influences. Ayahuasca particularly, which taught me to be more discerning and more skeptical of the information out there in the web. I used to be, I think, probably a lot more willing to give the benefit of the doubt to to people's, claims. But for one reason or another, the ayahuasca experience has provoked me to be a lot more skeptical, which might sound ironic to people. They might say, oh, shouldn't you be more open-minded if you've had all of these experiences? It's like, well, there's a danger of being so open-minded that your brain falls out. And I think that, that you have to actually show the validity of some of the controversial subjects that we're involved with. You have to be more discerning, and you have to be able to turn around and say, well, yes, that sounds reasonable, but what you're telling me sounds like nonsense, but give me some evidence for it, which is something that I've increasingly taken to doing. And I say that that's been a part of that learning I had with the plant teachers.
Oh, wow. That's really fascinating. It sounds like this has all come together from many different angles.
Many different angles. And you can get the sense of that. Yeah. I mean, I've been involved with shamanic kind of studies and practices for, probably 16, 17 years or so. So, I mean, it's another whole area that I'm involved in. And as I say, the consciousness research, psychic studies, and the ancient mysteries stuff, and then human origins from a purely kind of scientific perspective as well, looking through papers and looking at studies and assessing the data. So I'm involved in several different areas of research.
I do really feel that this thing is important because as a species, it's almost like we don't even really know what the heck we're doing here or where we came from or what we even are.
Yeah, I think you're right then. I think, there's this, also because of that, it allows for a lot of conjecture and guesswork, and a lot of ideas out there floating around the web, because people don't have that grounding. And because there is so many gaps perhaps in the story they've been told, it does allow for what is probably a lot of, nonsense, to be fair. But conversely as well, there's a lot of, authority type figures that are trying to make out that they do have the full story, which is also, a nonsense because they don't. I can say part of my work is pulling apart some of those claims and showing them to be factually, incorrect. So I'd like to say that I'm relatively fair in that, I will attack an alternative researcher's work just as readily as an academic, in the consensus's work, if I think that they're based on nonsense and they're manipulating or misleading people.
For so long, it seems that the world, pretty much, the academic world, has put the origins of civilization in that Egypt area and also Sumer, and in recent times, it seems like that's all been kind of overturned, like in really recent times.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with there's a few different discoveries, but I mean, obviously the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, in Anatolia has really kind of changed that. We have a 12,000-year-old megalithic complex, which just kind of, in terms of the old story, this thing just appears out of nowhere with a 6,000-year gap between it and, the constructions in Sumeria and in that, obviously in the Mesopotamian region. So, I mean, there's a problem there, because we were told, obviously, for decades that, civilization arises 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. Now we know that can't possibly be true because you've got obviously a complex culture building megaliths, not so far away from the Sumerian sort of region, but 6,000 years before. And also there's now evidence that there was much more complex cultural activity at other sites around the world at earlier periods, including evidence that we've been sort of manipulating or to some degree farming jungles going back perhaps tens of thousands of years, something that people didn't realize, that there's whole swathes of the Amazon and other jungles that look like they've in fact been engineered to some degree, that there's too many plants that benefit humans grouped together in small areas, and so it is clear that somebody has been deliberately favoring the growth of these plants in these areas over a vast period of time. So there's evidence that that perhaps humans themselves began, modern humans really may well originate from jungles rather than out on the plains of Africa. I mean, that's a whole other subject, Africa, but the plains, as opposed to jungles, because it was long been thought that we well adapted to the plains. But now they're looking, saying, hang on a minute, we've got, particularly there's some remains found in Indonesia recently, which, well, they were found a while ago, they've been redated, and we now know that they're towards 70,000 years old. And they're found like deep in a jungle in a cave. So clearly people were living, in the jungle areas really early, which shows adaptation to jungle living, which is a specialist kind of living. Because you and I mean, I don't know about your survival skills, but most people, who are not jungle tribal people can't just wander into the jungle and hope to survive.
Yeah.
You'd be lucky to be alive in a week or two, So clearly it took a great period of time adapting and learning to live in the jungle. So that would place us there even earlier than 70,000 years ago. So there's, that whole part of the story is being rewritten as well. And there have been, a whole long line of discoveries, particularly in the last couple of years, that, are really questioning that, how did civilization arise? Where, when, what is civilization? There's whole, big questions that are getting thrown up there, which are really eating into that consensus story that we've all been told.
What made you decide that you wanted to write a book?
This book, actually, I'll be honest, it started off as it was supposed to be one chapter of a book on my research in Ecuador, which was to do with a megalithic complex in the jungle there. And I thought I had to do one chapter that explains, how these people were in Ecuador early enough to build the complex, and how they relate to the first people in the Americas, and how that affects the out of Africa story, because there's evidence for people in the Americas much earlier than the consensus, which is the Clovis theory, which obviously is basically collapsed now, which was that nobody was there until about 13,000 years ago. Obviously the Clovis theory is basically collapsed. There's a few people clinging on to it, but there's clear evidence of humans throughout certainly the South America and Central America going back to long before that. I mean, at this point, there's very strong evidence going in the 20 to 30,000 year period. And then there's fragmentary evidence going back 40,000, 50,000, perhaps 60,000 years ago. And then there's a gap. And then you've got fragmentary evidence of earlier hominins in the Americas going back beyond 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. So that whole story obviously conflicts directly with the out of Africa models where, America was the last place to be reached and only recently. So I had to kind of explain before talking about this site and the people I thought that built it, how they could be there early enough. But what happened in the end is my one chapter grew into its own study, and became a book.
Yeah, that's incredibly fascinating. It sounds like there may well have been civilization really early, not only in South America, but maybe even in North America.
Yeah, I think there probably is. I know that at the moment Graham Hancock is doing a study out there, and he's looking for evidence of that perhaps lost high culture or civilization of North America, and that he's also provided evidence for what might have happened to it. Most people will know about the comic impact theories and obviously the problems in the Younger Dryas with extreme flooding events in North America. Not only his work, but there's a few different scholars and researchers have come out with information obviously on that, but most of your listeners will know of some of that through Graham Hancock's work, that basically it looks like parts of North America were almost washed clean by these huge flooding events, which were on cataclysmic scale. Plus, it seems like there was some insanely big wildfires. So when you start to put these factors in, you've got ice age conditions, then suddenly you've got, maybe a comet impact in North America, you've got fires, then you've got the melting of the ice, you've got cataclysmic floods sweeping across, wiping clean vast areas. You can start to appreciate why we're not seeing obvious evidence of these people, and why it is that we're finding that down in South America, you've got a lot more evidence than you have in North America. So it doesn't mean that the people weren't there as well at that early stage, but it's going to make it a heck of a lot more difficult to find that evidence.
Yeah, Graham Hancock, he's another guy that's attracted a lot of attention for going against the conventional way of thinking with this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and you will inevitably. I mean, you're up against, not only the academics and the consensus view, but all of the people that have subscribed fully to that, and who tend to have something of a knee-jerk reaction to anything that goes against the grain. So, unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is. And also, as Graham has always said, he's a journalist. He doesn't claim to be, a archaeologist or, or in any way saying that, that he is a, consensus scientist. He's writing his reports of what he has uncovered and sharing those, and they shouldn't necessarily be treated in the same way that an academic paper would be. That's not the aim of what he's doing in that respect. He's telling an account of what he has found through his research. So I think that, people should just, keep an open mind and look at that, and then they can go away and look at, whether they find supporting evidence for things that he's found and connections that he's made. And I would say the same with a lot of my work. My current book is somewhat different, and I sort of should say that, it's not like an easy reading, adventure story or my opinion on how the human story began. I've really delved into the academic, archives and gone through the reports and the papers and that's they're all referenced throughout the book. It's done as essentially as a popular science book. It's not intended to be simply, like an alternate history, research kind of overview. It's intended to reach young scientists and the future academics, if you like. That's my primary target audience. I'd also like, of course, the educated and deep thinking public to engage with the book and to go through it. It's not written in an overly dry academic style as would be, a textbook, but it is a popular science book. So I do have to go through and make sure that I'm not just saying I believe that this happened or I think that happened. I have to give a paper or a study or a find or something that supports my interpretations, and I do that throughout the book. Essentially, right from 7 million years ago, I sort of spend some time in that early period assessing what's changed in terms of new finds, and then I take that all the way up to around 20,000 years ago. My main focus is obviously the emergence of Homo sapiens and then modern humans, but there is more in there. So if people have an interest in Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, and that story between sort of 7 million years ago up until the first split with Homo sapiens, they'll find that there's a good bit of information on that. But I think the area that interests most people will be where I explore the origins of Homo sapiens. You can always say that you can feel free to buy the book and skip through a few chapters if that's what someone wants to know about, because there's a few chapters on that. But I do sort of begin elsewhere, in an older period.
So this is all a long, sweeping story of the human race and even species that came before it. Could you kind of walk us through that early beginning from proto-man to Homo sapien and where Homo sapien went from there?
Sure. I start off looking at, as I say, about 7 million years ago. There's some argument now as to whether or not the split with the ancestors of chimpanzees might be earlier, perhaps 15 million years ago even. But I don't know if I mentioned that I think I might briefly. But anyway, we know that from around about, say, somewhere between 7 and 5 million years ago, we have the earliest fossils of what seem to be, hominins and, the creatures that have split away from the lines that lead to other living primates like chimpanzees, etc. So we tend to think of these as hominins, which means, within that human family. The early group are known as the Australopithecines. There's the possibility that they are not directly related to us, and there's a possibility they are. But, so I explore them to a short degree. But one of the things I mentioned early on is that there's a widespread belief in the subject area that the earliest ancestors around that period were, ape-like. That they were tree dwellers in the forests of Africa, very ape-like. But this is not necessarily true, and it is not proven by the evidence. It may equally be that these were quite human-like, and that were more human-like than they were ape-like. Because there's some interesting things to consider here, that, for example, when you look at our close relatives, the other primates, particularly chimpanzees, that the way they move is quite fascinating, because what you see is that they have this kind of knuckle walking, which is unlike other like quadrupedic animals. We look at any four-legged animal and how it moves, and you can contrast it with the chimpanzees. It reminds you somewhat of a bipedal creature that has begun to revert to being quadrupedic, rather than it having evolved to move on four legs. So there's some interesting, thoughts on that by academics, which, not my idea. I found that actually said by a well-respected professor, pointing out that it may well be that our earliest ancestor is more human-like. And I think that in itself is quite revolutionary, because it's something you're never taught. You don't get told at school, but perhaps they were more human-like. I don't remember anyone ever saying that.
No.
And yet, it's always an ape, isn't it? So I think things like that people have to consider as well, that even from a consensus, professor saying, well, actually, it could be more human-like. You thought, wow, that's quite interesting, because we've all heard, some more conspiracy type stuff where they say, there used to be humans, a longer time, in the past than we thought. Well, perhaps there was some type of human-like creature that, reverted to being more ape-like, and now is reverting to being more human-like. I mean, we don't know. I mean, and that's an open question. And people say, could that be true? Yes, it could be true. We don't know, because evolution works in funny ways, and that you adapt to the situations that are going on around you. So, if it became beneficial to become, a four-legged tree dweller or whatever, then we would eventually become that, but if it becomes beneficial, then revert again. And I've seen the same argument in the brain size. That I've seen a scientist saying that it looks almost as though that we may have in our ancestry a long way back, millions and millions of years ago, a large-brained ancestor who lost that large brain, but it was recorded in our DNA, and that it's begun to express again, in more recent times. So there's a lot of these things that you start to think, well, hang on a minute, these are not coming from, ancient aliens theorists or someone that you can easily turn around and say, oh, well, they're just, they're kooky or something. These are like, serious academics who are looking at it and saying, well, yes, could be that. And I think that's astonishing in itself. But anyway, these early hominins go on, over the last, I'd say from about 4 million years ago is when you'd say that they were more recognizably, human, if you like. And certainly, you'd see them as being different to us, but, they're wandering around, they're using tools, they're upright, they look more or less human. So that's really when we've got a bit more solid, archaeology to support that, there's human ancestors are wandering around in Africa, possibly outside of Africa. There's been a few finds recently, but certainly at least in Africa at that period. And that these go on then to about, around 1.8 million, say 2 million years ago, we have the most, I guess, significant change, which is the emergence of Homo erectus. And Homo erectus really is sort of a fascinating species, because we find it well beyond Africa.
Yeah, so that's the one that you always hear being talked about. Homo erectus is right up there.
Yeah, because it's, suddenly you have evidence of this species in Southeast Asia, up in the Georgian Caucasus, and in Africa, all around the same time, around about 1.8 to 1.9 million years ago. So it's almost as if, like, click your fingers, bang, it's everywhere. What's happened here? Because that's quite surprising, because at first they thought you'd see, these species appear in Africa, and you should then see them slowly, migrating out, and you might find, a few pockets of bones at 1.6 million, and then further away at 1.4 and so on. But it doesn't seem like that. Instead, it appears that, they are spread very rapidly. And there's questions there then about how that has happened. Was there perhaps an earlier species of hominin which was in Africa and Eurasia, and that the Homo erectus populations have emerged separately from that older population? Or did this migration happen earlier and we just haven't found the bones? Or, so there is a kind of a mystery there to how we've got these hominins all the way down to Southeast Asia, so quickly. So that's where really things start to get fascinating, because generally speaking, it's been assumed that these are the best candidates for the species that precedes archaic Homo sapiens. So if we've emerged from them, then it's interesting to see that could potentially have happened anywhere across the world for a start, which undermines that surety, that, well, if they were only in Africa and they were definitely our ancestors, you'd have to say that, okay, well, we must have emerged from them there. But we don't see that. Instead, we see that they're actually spread right across the habitable part of the world really early. So that's where I really start to get into this problematic data. But Homo erectus also they seem to do some incredible stuff, because we've got down in Southeast Asia, you've got evidence that they perhaps were sailing, because we know that hominins in that region reached Flores by about 1 million years ago. And Flores is a small island in Indonesia which requires you to cross what's called the Wallace Line, which is a geological boundary between Southeast Asia and Australasia. And it's like intense currents moving down between the Indonesian islands, which make it really difficult to, island hop your way across. But we find these tools at 1 million years ago on Flores, and then later on in the record they found bones of what's called Homo floresiensis, which is the Hobbit people, and those seem to go back to at least 800,000 years ago on the island, and also a later period up to around 50,000 years ago. There's more evidence of these little people. But the bottom line is that shows that there is hominin activity, moving around in the islands of Indonesia like 1 million years ago, which is quite extraordinary as well in itself, because you've got to kind of explain how they're doing that. One of the theories has been that people were washed off of an island and somehow floated to Flores, but that's a problematic theory, but as is the possibility that they were sailing 1 million years ago, which obviously is problematic. Either way, you've got some mystery there and some extraordinary events going on with humans managed to penetrate a supposedly near impenetrable line very early in the timeline, and placing them basically in spitting distance of Australasia, which I believe they reached almost immediately after that.
It would make sense for life to come from Africa or near the equator, because even now it seems like there's a lot more species of life in those areas, almost like that's where new species are created in the jungle.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all if really that the equator played the crucial role, through most of human prehistory, because, I think that's why, funnily enough, you do tend to find some of the most interesting evidence along the equator. And Flores, again, is on the equator. And, if you look across the world, again, to the Americas, you find a lot of the oldest and most interesting finds in sort of Central America and clustered around the equator. So, I definitely think, that equatorial band is a key area to look for signs of, our early story. And unsurprisingly, that is generally where we're finding it. On all 3 points, you've got to look in Central America, you've got to look in, obviously, Equatorial Africa and across sort of Indonesia and that part of Southeast Asia, the top of, Northern Australia, and that those areas have all produced incredible finds.
And at this point in the story, are we in the Ice Age?
So, well, we've sort of going in and out of ice ages over obviously vast periods of time. Specifically, 1 million years ago, I can't remember off the top of my head what the climate was like. But we sort of go in, so we go in and out of these like long periods of ice. The last ice age, though, it goes, we came out, well, we're still in it, but the last great melting obviously is about sort of 15,000 years ago. Prior to that, we were in an extended cold period for some considerable period. I'd have to sort of pull it up. I can't say that I've cast to mind the exact dates for the ins and outs of the ice, but what we do find is that around that time we have then these changes in form in the human species that begin to happen in the hominin species. Basically around 800,000 years ago, there's a sudden rapid change in human form, with the brain becoming accelerated really large. Early humans start to build shelters. There's increasingly common use of fire. New types of tools appear. So the human story really seems to accelerate around about 800,000 years ago, and that is a period when there is lower sea levels and there is ability to sort of move around between areas that you wouldn't necessarily be able to easily move around between, now. So yeah, 800,000 years ago is a really interesting period where strange things are happening evolutionarily, and that, the climate does allow some movement that we wouldn't have now. So that's, I think, is a crucial time, because we also now find that in very recent genetic studies, they have basically uncovered that it seems that the earliest direct ancestors of modern humans and of all Homo sapiens closest relatives, like what I'd call Homo sapiens denisova, Homo sapiens Neanderthals, this family begins to break away from its direct ancestors around about 750 to 800,000 years ago. So this is in line with what we already knew, that there was this sudden brain growth, and these changes in behavior around about 800,000 years ago. But they're now beginning to mesh with new genetic studies, because until very recently, it was thought that the earliest Homo sapiens arose perhaps 200,000 to maybe, 400,000 years ago. But now we're seeing, well, hang on a minute, our earliest direct ancestors are splitting away around about, somewhere between 700,000 and 800,000 years ago. So this has been, and that's only in the last year that's come about. So this has been an enormous shake-up, and obviously combined with new finds of Homo sapiens, remains in, or redating of them, both in East Asia and in North Africa, with them taking back to 260,000 years ago in East Asia, 300,000 years ago in North Africa. So there's, the whole story's had a huge shake-up. And we now know that, the earliest, what I'd call archaic Homo sapiens, were probably wandering around some 700 or so thousand years ago, so it's pretty incredible.
700,000 years, it seems like that's not that long ago for our species to come into being.
In some respects, but then I guess, it's a lot longer than what we were previously told that it was. It's gone back considerably from that 200,000.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Does it seem to you like the proto-humans advanced too quickly? Was there a jump, or is the picture now completely different? Could we
there's definitely a jump around that. But in that period of around 800 to 700,000 years ago, as I say, where all these species start to emerge. I mean, the other thing is, you have to say is I find it particularly peculiar that in that period, that not only do you have this change from whatever this being was 800,000 years ago. I mean, we can assume it was a Homo erectus, or we can call it a Homo erectus-like hominin, because we're not sure absolutely, who we've come out of. But what we can say is that around that period, suddenly you have the beginnings of multiple lines of humans, as I said, Denisovans, Neanderthals, our sort of Homo sapiens, or, that then also other unidentified hominins. We know that there's genetic traces in modern humans of at least, two other populations, and there's no reason to think that there weren't other populations that have gone extinct. But the strange thing is they all seem to be starting to come out around that period. So you don't just have a change in the population that we advance on to a new form, but we suddenly split into multiple forms, and on top of that have the fastest accelerated brain growth of any period detected in the archaeological record, along with other significant changes in our genetics and form and behavior. So for me, there's a big anomaly hanging over that period, which will feature in a later book of mine, because I don't think the consensus explains that very well at all.
Yeah, it just seems like humans are so different than animals out there. Like even monkeys, I mean, we walk upright, we don't really have any fur, we have this skin, and even our eyes and hair. It does seem rather unique in the animal kingdom.
And some of that uniqueness comes down to another anomaly, which is the fused chromosome that we have, which some listeners may be aware of. I think it's top of my head, I think it's chromosome 23. I'd have to double check that, but anyway, there's two of our chromosomes are fused, which means that we have a different number of chromosomes to other primate relatives. Now, this is probably an enormous barrier to interbreeding for a start. So it would have most likely cut us off from any near relatives, any other primates, once this happened. And it also seems to have been involved with this brain growth and these some other benefits, because whatever benefits it gave, they must have been profound, because the only hominins that are alive today, and that the ones that we can detect in the archaeological record, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, they all shared in this. They all had this fused chromosome. So this shows that it happened at least back as far as that period 700 to 800,000 years ago, when we were diverging, because they all have it, right? So all of our close relatives share in that fused chromosome. And then you look at us, and you look at the profound differences between us and other primates, and in some ways we're very similar to them. In other ways, there are profound differences. Obviously, form is a very obvious way. You look and you say, okay, we look different, but we have profound differences in the way our brains work, and we have profound differences in the way our immune systems work, and all sorts of things that really separate us in a deeper way than just our physical adaptations. And I do think that there's an anomaly in there, because yes, people can say, okay, well, sometimes these mutations just happen. Okay, yeah, but this is a profound one, because everyone else who doesn't have it, is not alive today. They didn't survive through that 700,000 years. They seem to have just quietly gone away, and there's only these other humans that that remain. So it's very strange that it must give us some incredible benefits, and I think that that we really need to think about that. And there's a number of other things associated with that, which I would have to go into intense detail. But suffice to say, it's not the only anomaly. That there's several other mutations connected with it, which are equally strange and equally unlikely, that all happened sort of bunched around it, and that seem to make us who we are. So I'll let your listeners kind of infer into that what they will, because until I write it up and I provide the supporting science evidence, I won't sort of go too much out there with it, but I just leave people, you can sort of see where that's kind of going, and I think people can imagine themselves. Obviously, I see some possibilities in there for why humans have emerged, and that certainly there's an oddity in the record.
Yeah, it is very strange. I know there a lot of people, they'll say, oh, it was God, or it was aliens, or maybe it was even some kind of drug that they were taking.
Yeah, and like at that point, I think people, at least you can say, is that they have some reason to say those things, because it is so strange that there's really I think it gives people the right to sort of speculate quite wildly on it, because it is a very odd anomaly. And I don't blame people for saying they see God's hand in it. I don't blame people for saying they see aliens in it. I wouldn't blame them if they say they see an advanced civilization, changing humans, or any of those things, because it's that odd that it certainly provokes that thinking. And and then it's for individual researchers to look at the evidence and decide what they think is the most likely answer. Obviously I have my opinion, others will have their opinions, and I know that's come out in a few books, already. I'm not the only person aware of that, of course. In fact, I was just reading Greg Braden's one of his books the other day. I'm not a big reader of the sort of Hay House New Age kind of books, but because it was on evolution, I got a copy online, and he does go into that. He spends quite a bit of time on that, and his opinion is that that it suggests intelligence of some sort at work in the process of human evolution, and I would agree with that. Now, whether you say that intelligence is God, is something about human consciousness, is something about aliens, that is a matter of of some debate, but it's hard not to see that anomaly as being, some strange kind of sign of intelligence in our process, and the way that it was so beneficial that only those with it, seem to then flourish.
Yeah, definitely. And for all we know, maybe the answers are in the area that we talked about earlier, where humans almost seem to have a psychic connection to each other. Maybe the answers could even be there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think, that these are other areas as well that are important to look at. In the book I've produced, I've been wary of going into those areas, and that's for a good reason. As I say, it's directed at people who would want to see just, the science of the story, at this stage, and it's setting the foundations for other books that I'm writing at the moment. Because, if you start off with one word that can be called woo-woo in your book, that's it. Every academic-minded, consensus thinker, all of the scientists, all of their students, all of those people will immediately say, oh, but he's got that woo-woo in his book. and so that book goes into the garbage bin, at least for them, not for the other, for the rest of the public and for the open-minded public. But as you know, those people will use that one little thing that you've said to put your book into the garbage bin. So I've been quite careful not to do that. But it doesn't mean that those aren't legitimate areas of study, and I do follow them in my own research. But the current book is written for somebody that wouldn't want to hear about, God, aliens, ancient civilizations. It is just the foundation from which I can then discuss other subjects, if you like. I feel that I have to. I feel that having in the past written more for the open-minded, alternative history kind of crowd, that I'm aware that you don't really have to go to the same levels of intense referencing and details that you'd have to for, more skeptical thinkers. So I've deliberately written this book for those other people, and I will produce another book which will go into some of these areas which I know an awful lot of people would like to hear me speak on, and I will be doing that. I mean, I'm going to write a book that covers my own research journey, which involves, I've been under the pyramids, in tunnels in Egypt. I've been I've been with old weird Mayan guys and they're nowhere telling me about underground, catacombs with strange things going on in them. I've walked up into the Caucasus hunting for giant bones with the Science Channel. So I've been out there, done all sorts of strange things, found all sorts of strange places. I'm aware of all kinds of bizarre things that are going on, and conspiracies and strange forces. All of that is, for me, legitimate and a legitimate research area, and that will all feature in a separate book. But I also have to produce two quite sciencey books, which is this one that I've put out there, and a second one which will be about the early populating of the Americas, going back to well before as I say, the Clovis thing. As I mentioned earlier, there's evidence for earlier migrations going back much further back to 50,000, and some maybe 100 or 200,000. I'm going to be detailing that in a separate book, and then the book after that, or concurrently with it, will go more into the broad discussion of the research area and some of that stranger phenomena.
Yeah, that sounds very fascinating, and I can't wait. But since we are still talking about humans, I do want to ask, did those early humans, did they live very long, and were they really strong, like what is depicted in some of our movies and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems that from what we can understand that Neanderthals were stronger than us, that they seem to have been, better built. But there are periods when we seem to have been taller or larger, and then periods where we seem to be shorter, smaller. It does, and then again across different regions, there's differences. But I don't think in terms of lifespan that we can really say for sure, how long we've lived in the past, on average. I think, in the portion of time that we can look into with genetics and stuff, they usually seem to suggest that we had shorter lifespans, particularly partly because we didn't have, medical help in the same way we have now. And there was a much, harder life, going out there against the wilds and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's a tendency to suggest we lived shorter periods, but I don't know that that's proven in general, that we can say that in that whole period that there wasn't times when, humans had extended lifetimes. I mean, it is possible as far as I know. I don't know any reason why, or any way we could definitely write that off. We can only peer back a certain depth. One of the things people have to understand is we don't have DNA evidence, going back that far. The oldest DNA from, like early hominins that we have is about 500,000 years old, right? So we haven't got any DNA from these earlier hominins going back millions of years. That's something I guess that not all listeners would know that, because, sometimes there's an assumption that we have DNA that just goes back into the vast past, but that's not really the case. All we have beyond that is, bone fragments and stone tools. And so there's only a certain amount you can tell from that. Obviously if you find bones and examine them, sometimes you can get an idea of how old the person was when they died, or, and obviously you can see changes in the skull, and you can get an idea which species they were, but you can't really go into the depth that you can when you've got DNA, and we're very limited on that. And in terms of fully modern humans like us, we only have DNA going back about 50,000 years. So, I mean, again, so it makes it problematic to say what it was like, in terms of beyond that, what was happening with the individual humans in terms of, their own, their genes and stuff. We don't really know. We can infer some stuff from the DNA that we've got, but it's not from direct ancestors. It's from ancestors of Neanderthals. So that's a kind of an issue. Another thing I would like to raise, that while we're on that subject of the age of DNA, is that in fact, Africa, which is obviously always vaunted as, the origins of all hominins and humans, and everyone always comes out of Africa, is that we have very young DNA, for Africa. The oldest actually African DNA we have is only 8,000 years old, right? And so that's something that doesn't get really a lot of talking about, because I hear people say to me, but look, Bruce, it's all proven by the African DNA. And it's like, hang on a minute. Do you know how old the DNA is from African finds? Because people say that to you like that we have million-year-old DNA from Africa. But that's total bullshit, because we don't have that. We have 8,000-year-old DNA. And you know how far back 8,000-year-old DNA can place people in Africa, right? 8,000 years ago. Beyond that, all you have is the fragmentary fossil record, right? So I find it quite sort of amusing sometimes when people turn around and say to me, but Bruce, you got this theory, but obviously you're wrong, because we've got all this like African DNA that proves you're wrong. And it's like, well, show me it. Show me the study. Show me the finding of this ancient African DNA, because I do know the papers, I do know the studies, and I know there isn't any.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and what in reality is done is samples of modern, like fully modern African DNA, and I'm half West African, so samples of modern people's DNA like mine would be taken, and they would look at that and say, well, we assume that Africans were the first people, therefore this African DNA that he has goes back to 200,000 years ago at least, because we're sure that Africans, there were humans living in Africa at that period, and that they stayed there up until 60,000 years ago, and then they came out. So therefore, African DNA can be considered, pure African, all the way back from 60,000 to 200,000 years ago. All right, but that's just a wild assumption. That's not a scientific, fact. I mean, you've got to really think about that. Hang on a minute, that you're just making an assumption that this modern African's DNA, can be considered to be like pure early human, African DNA. That's not really true. And it's not backed up by all of the evidence out there. I mean, there's some, for example, even with the DNA that has been found in these 6,000 to 8,000-year-old sites in Africa, they found that there was far more evidence of gene flow from Eurasia going back into Africa than they ever thought, that there had been some early migrations into Africa, even in that period. So they know that what they had considered, that this modern African, genome was in fact mixed Eurasian African for a start. They've also now realizing that there is Neanderthal DNA. For a long time, they've always said Africans have no Neanderthal DNA. Well, hang on a minute. If there's gene flow from Eurasia, even in the last few thousand years, and all Eurasians have around 2 to 3% of Neanderthal DNA, how can Africans not have any Neanderthal DNA?
Yeah, that really flips everything upside down. Yeah.
So things that they've been considering as pure African DNA, which they've ignored, because, well, that's pure African DNA. Some of that is Neanderthal, right? Some of that is also Eurasian. So this whole area is currently in a bit of a sort of a crisis rewrite, but it's never done in a very loud way. So the public is not really talking, oh, by the way, this is a total freaking screw up here, and we're just not sure how to get our heads around it. So instead it's like, well, there's a little change here, and then in a few weeks' time you'll hear another news story. Oh, there's a little change here. But it's not just little changes. When you add these together, there's an enormous problem, because on top of the assumption that, that this DNA, is African. You go further back, right? The whole basis of the understanding of out of Africa as the and I'm talking about here the recent out of Africa populating of Eurasia, okay? Forget about early hominins, who as far as we can see, early hominins were, in Africa largely, and that is most likely where the earliest hominins were living, okay? I'm fine with that. It may be wrong, but that's where the strongest evidence is, right? But when we look at this other period and we say the recent out of Africa, and it's supposedly 60,000 years ago, a group of Africans, right, they walk out across the Levant and the Middle East, and they go into, through Eurasia, spread across into East Asia, down into Southeast Asia, reach Australasia. All of that is within the last 60,000 years. I mean, nearly everyone out there in the world will have heard at some point, modern humans walked out of Africa 60,000 years ago, populated the world, right? That's commonly known, okay? What most people don't understand is what is that based on? Other than the assumption that, humans lived in Africa a long time ago, therefore they must have come out of there. But it's not as simple as that. What it's actually based on is that when you look at the genome of modern Africans, you find that around about 70,000 years ago, two new haplogroups appear. Basically, there's a female and male. There's a mtDNA haplogroup, and there's also a Y chromosomal haplogroup, right? And these are called haplogroup L3 and haplogroup CT, right? And these both appear in the African genome of modern Africans. We've traced it back, and they say, okay, this has appeared about 70,000 years ago. We know that these two haplogroups, right, are basal to all Eurasians. So everybody in Eurasia can trace back to an ancestor that was carrying those two, a small group of ancestors carrying those two haplogroups. Therefore, the assumption is that they must trace back to those people, in Africa, in East Africa, where this chromosome these two haplogroups seem to appear first amongst this group of East Africans 70,000 years ago. So therefore, working hypothesis, two mutations occurred simultaneously in East Africa, and then almost immediately, for some reason, amongst that same group where the mutation happened, a party of people walk out of Africa, perhaps following what they call green corridors, which is, an environmental period in which plants and animals lead people into a new region, and that they then spread out and become all Eurasians and Australasians, right? It's a nice theory until you really test it, right? Because what you actually find is that in that, well, first of all, you find that the Y chromosomal and mtDNA mutation rates are vastly different, right? They're different by 10 times, okay? So the chances of having mutations happening on both lines, right, in the same moment, in the same place, is really, really small, really unlikely. The second thing is you find that the spread of L3 in Africa moves westwards, right? As though it's going into Africa, not out of Africa. It appears first amongst Africans living very near to the Bab el-Mandab Straits, which is one of the two main exit and entryways into the continent. And so you start to, hang on a minute, wouldn't this be better explained by people walking in, right, and breeding with the local people? And yes, is the answer. Because secondly, when you see what is happening in that period around about 70,000 years ago, why would people walk into Africa? Well, there's an enormous climate disaster, right, raging across the northern hemisphere, across Eurasia. Yeah, the climate is going down into like severe ice. There's been a huge supervolcano has erupted in Indonesia, and the plume of dust, unbelievable amounts of dust, gases, they're spewing up, and they're going northwest, drifting across Eurasia, accelerating an existing like cooling phase, rapidly cooling the climate. Also, acid rain, cutting out sunlight. You've got this disaster, right? So all these humans across Eurasia, they're dying off in droves, along with animals, plants, everything. And then, funnily enough, in that period, because this is 74,000 years ago, right? This volcano's gone off. Funnily enough, about 73,000 years ago, the two basal haplogroups appear next to the Bab el-Mandab Straits and move west into Africa. What does that look like to you?
It looks like that our traditional views, again, they've just been completely upturned, and we have to go back to the drawing board.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear evidence of people fleeing from a catastrophe and running into Africa and carrying those basal haplogroups with them, which means that they also existed already all across Eurasia and down into Australasia, that these two basal haplogroups are in fact were common already across the rest of the world outside of Africa. And that, so there's been this complete misunderstanding. And the second problem you encounter with this is that to have people coming out of Africa at that point is madness, right? Because in two recent studies, two separate ancient paleoclimate studies, they found firstly that the climate in the Middle East and the Levant, right, was catastrophically bad around about between sort of 72,000 to around 59,000 years ago, which is bang smack in that period when people are supposed to be migrating out, right? So you've got the area we're supposed to be walking through, so it's got the worst droughts and arid conditions that they've ever been able to detect for the region. So you've got almost no water, no plant life, nothing to eat. So this green corridor has turned into just a bleak, catastrophic landscape of death, right, which we're supposed to be walking happily into. And then a separate study found that the same conditions were in place in northeast Africa, right? So even to get to that exit, they had to walk through a bleak hellscape, right? So what is the motivation of people down in sub-equatorial Africa who are living in their sort of paradise, right? That's unaffected by Toba and that hasn't got this stuff going on, to suddenly, for no reason at all, wander north, into the grimmest conditions you could imagine, and just keep going, with it getting worse and worse the further they head. These are humans like us. I know that you and I are not going to keep going towards death if we can turn back and go back to our sunny village. There's no way.
Yeah. Come to think of it, it does. I did kind of think sometimes that, this idea that people want to go from where it's warm and sunny, and why would they want to move northward where things are just colder and colder and colder the further you go?
Yeah, you have to have reasons. During temperate times, yeah, people do stuff. But when it's really cold to the north, when it's, when there's massive problems, you don't see those kind of movements of people. And now that they're detecting that that's the situation, instead of turning around and saying, oh, it doesn't make sense, all they said was, perhaps humans were forced to move because of terrible conditions. It's you can't have it both ways, because for years and years and years, they said, oh, green corridors encouraged Africans to move out into Eurasia. Now it's bleak devastation encouraged them to, you can't win every which way you want it. It's, to me, that is the heights of arrogance, where no matter what the evidence says, you're not dropping your theory. And I think that is really arrogant, that they won't even turn around and say, you know what, maybe we need to revisit this. The evidence is going completely against us. On top of that, we know that we found evidence that Australasians, the Aboriginals in Australasia, were on their continent going back well over 65,000 years ago. Most of the evidence pointing towards 70, 80,000 and beyond. And you're still talking about a migration from 60,000 years ago that populates Australasia. Now, how did they do that then? Did they have a time machine? Because they're arriving in Australasia before the migration starts.
Yeah, this just proves all the more that our minds are inside boxes and we are taught things that are probably not even true.
Absolutely. And things that are provably not true in that respect. And when you look at it, and this is what my argument is, one of the arguments in the book, which I say is perhaps the strongest and most important argument, is that when you have this cataclysmic event, that there was people living all across Eurasia. So, forget about this idea people are just coming out of Africa and blah, blah. There is an established population of multiple kinds of humans, right? Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, others that we don't even know the names of, right? They're living all across Eurasia, from Africa to Australasia. Basically, the whole habitable world is populated, right? And then 74,000 years ago, the volcano goes off, yeah? It wipes out the people in Southeast Asia, pretty much all of them. And it also causes this catastrophe across Eurasia. Neanderthals, to some degree, some of them survive in some pockets because they're better adapted to cold conditions than we are. Denisovans don't do very well, and we don't do very well. But you have survival zones, obviously, in the southern hemisphere. And the only survival zones that you can reach from Eurasia, obviously, are Australasia and South Africa. So you have what's called two like founder populations. So you have this kind of founder effect, which is where you get a snapshot of the genetic diversity of all those humans, of just the survivors, in these two pockets. And then as the conditions change, and obviously as they improve, people start to then be able to come back out. And with the climate disaster still underway, blocking the Africans up until about 59,000 years ago, they're still kind of stuck. But the Australasians start to move north before them. And that's why we have a repopulating of Eurasia, which begins about 60,000 years ago. As the Out of Africa people have said, 60,000 years ago, I don't dispute the dates. And the debates, these dates are in the genetics. You can find that there's evidence of this spread of people and a divergence in the DNA around that period. So I don't argue with that. But what I argue with is where it's beginning. Because if you look at the evidence for where the oldest groups of fully modern humans, like us, basically our people, if you like, where they seem to appear first, it's in like Southeast Asia. It's in Australasia, Southeast Asia, then East Asia, then Central Asia. They arrive in Europe, right, around about 40,000, 45,000 years ago, right? But you've already got them in Asia 60,000 years ago. Does that sound like it's coming out of Africa to you?
No, not at all.
When you look at that map, are you telling me that it makes any sense that the oldest populations coming out of Africa are in East Asia and in Australasia, and that they're moving through Central Asia towards Europe? I mean, Europe's really near to like North Africa. Like if you're coming out of North Africa, like why is it you're not reaching Europe pretty early on in this story? Why is it the last place? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Only makes sense if these Africans are trapped and they've not been able to move up, or they've chosen not to, combined with the fact they know there's a disaster to the north. So they're staying in their nice area, whereas down in Southeast Asia, you've got this movement of people. And it's not not only the common sense, but we see that in the genetics. We see that the Australasian genome splits from that of what we consider to be Africans around about 72,000 years ago, that date again. And that's because you've had this population in the middle, which has been destroyed, right? So you've severed the gene flow between Australasia and Africa. The region is now split. And they found that, yes, that what we consider to be early Africans and early Australasians, they split about 72,000 years ago, that date again, just after the Toba disaster. And that then there's a split between them and Eurasians, right, at around about 60,000 to 50,000 years ago during this populating of Eurasia, i.e., Eurasians are splitting from Australasians about 60,000 years ago, and the Australasians have already split from that African group 72,000 years ago because of the disaster. So what I'm giving to people is really fact-based common sense, right? Where I supply you the studies, I supply the papers, supply the archaeology, and then I also say, look, this is also simple common sense that like a child can understand. It's not a complex thing where, you have to go through all of these studies. They're there if you want them, but I'm also supplying simple common sense.
Yeah, that's definitely turning things upside down a bit. In your opinion, could this point to there having been some kind of ancient astronauts or some force that was making humans more intelligent or more civilized in that Mesopotamia area?
Well, I don't find that kind of side of it myself. So certainly not the Anunnaki type side, which I know people is a common view. But I just say that I don't see that anything particularly special happens in that period because, as I say, we've already got like earlier signs of high intelligence and megalith building, and possibly if things like Gunung Padang pan out, that we may have large megaliths in Indonesia going back well over 12,000 years ago, or at least 12,000 years ago. There's signs of complex, thinking. There's art in Indonesia going back 500,000 years ago on the Trinil shell, which is an engraved shell. So, I think higher thinking and all that's well underway after that event 800,000 years ago. So if there is this interaction, if you like, from something outside of humanity, then for me, it goes back to that earlier point 800,000 years ago. That's not to say that intelligences of the universe have not been taking an interest in our world or interacting. And obviously people are seeing stuff every day. I've had my own experiences. I've seen things in the sky. Millions of other people have. There's thousands of stories of interaction with, non-human intelligences. So have we been shepherded along? Have we been poked here and there to do stuff? Yeah, I'd say there's a darn good chance of that. But I think the big changes, happen in that earlier period. Anything that's been done, or is going on beyond that, I think is on a much smaller scale. That perhaps somebody somewhere gets an experiment done on them, or a small group of people, or something is done to maybe push people in a certain direction. And like some of the cataclysms that happened, we don't, I can't write off as to whether or not that they're done from outside. I know obviously to an ingrained skeptic, there's, that's nonsense, but we don't know. Like, we don't know that if there's an advanced species out there in the galaxy, if it wants to push a comet towards us to change things, look, we have no way of knowing if that happened. So, I mean, I'd say that, yeah, we have to keep an open mind, and we have to sort of look for evidence that some of these events could be directed. Did they have benefits, or did they push us a certain way? Because it is sort of funny that certainly in respect to some of these events, it does seem to push us a certain way. And that, as I say, a cataclysm led to this most recent repopulating, and obviously to changes in humans. Because I would say that at that point, you're pushing together a lot of these lineages that have been living spread across Eurasia. Because once you're pushed into a corner, groups that probably wouldn't have interbred, end up interbreeding and mixing. So you're creating new forms, if you like, of humans. So if this was a grand experiment, you could see that if you were from some, nth level intelligence or whatever, who can play the long game, that, yeah, certainly some of these events, could be directed. I got no way to say that they haven't. I can't prove they are, but I can certainly see how that they're possible.
Yeah, there's really an infinite amount of possibilities. We can't get sucked into a dogmatic approach, even to things like ancient astronauts. We got to keep an open mind. For all we know, there could have been these huge wars between proto-humans or different species of humans. Mm-hmm. There's just so many different ways it could have played out.
Absolutely. And with the fossil record being limited, we only have what we have to go on, and it's, that makes it, always a little bit fragmentary, because, there could have been, and probably were, many other kinds of what we might think of as fairly anatomically modern humans. I mean, and we also have to wonder what did they achieve, some of these guys up in Eurasia, guys and gals, that, they spread across that vast region, perhaps for hundreds of thousands of years. They had a lot of time to do stuff, that we may have come back in, our group 60,000 years ago. But I mean, they've had there was a lot of time up there for things to happen. It's hard to accept that there was nothing that we would have considered to be a recognizable high cultural civilization, in that period somewhere, or many of those, because I mean, it is a long time. And so I keep an open mind about that we just simply haven't found the direct evidence, or that the evidence has been misinterpreted. Because, I mean, for example, one area that I'm quite skeptical about, if you look at the Olmec in Mesoamerica, that, people tend to say, well, got these Olmec heads, right? And that, they're assumed to be the same age as other Olmec, sites and archaeology. I don't believe that. Right, because when you look at them, you look at the images of the Olmec heads, and when they found them, they found like buried, like meters under the ground and stuff. Some of them, you can see these holes with these guys digging them up, and you look at the faces and you compare them to how the Olmecs generally drew themselves, right? And look at the Olmec art, which is definitely Olmec art. They look very Asiatic-looking people, right? And you look at the Olmec heads, doesn't look anything like the same people. Right, so sometimes we can take an artifact and think, well, that's nearby to where these people live, therefore it's theirs. And because you can't directly date stone, you're left with that problem that you can only infer how old a stone carving is, by its context. And so if you misunderstand that context, or if an item has been dug up, reburied, you've got no real way of knowing how old that is. And so it may well be that there are, finds that are made, across Eurasia, which are assumed to be quite modern, but are not. That are incredibly old.
So those Olmecs, it sounds like you're saying those big heads were not even made by what we think of as the Olmec people?
No, I don't believe they're made by them at all.
Oh, wow.
I don't think there's any way to really show that they were. I mean, you look at them, honestly, I'd advise anyone listening to go and Google Olmec art and have a look at the figurines and things that they made. And you look, and the guys look Asian, right? And you look at those heads, they don't look Asian to me. They look either Australasian or African. I would say that they're Australasian Aboriginals, because obviously my work shows that these Australasian Aboriginals are the first people to recover the lands of Eurasia and the Americas. But they may even be older than that. They may be from one of these older waves that goes back 100,000 or 200,000 years ago. And these remember the Olmec as well are the people that gave the world the Mayan calendar. They passed it on to the Mayans, the long count calendar. So this actually may be extraordinarily old, system passed down from a much older civilization. They obviously, as we know as well, the Mayans inherited incredible mathematical knowledge, incredible astronomical knowledge, right? Not to say that they couldn't do it themselves, obviously, but they inherited some of this from the Olmec. And who were these who did the Olmec get some of this from? Because if they've got remains there, artifacts which are pre-Olmec, which look like they are depicting people from somewhere completely different, from a completely different epoch, there's maybe an unbroken tradition there going back to people living who knows when. 100,000 years ago, maybe more. We don't know. And I'd advise anyone to go and look at that, because it's something you can test yourself quite easily by looking at the way they normally portray themselves. I don't believe there's any way to argue that these are Olmec faces.
Yeah, Bruce, you sent me a picture that actually linked the Aboriginals to other places on the globe. That was really fascinating. There seems to definitely be some hard evidence for that particular theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they found genetic traces of an early population of Australasians detected amongst like isolated Brazilian tribes, for example. I mean that they these are some of the most isolated people on the planet. So obviously they haven't mixed with other groups much, they've inbred a lot, if you like. So they've retained some very old genes, and some of these genes are most closely related to the oldest, genomes of Australasian type people. And the oldest skulls found in South America, are also called proto-Australoid. The morphology, the way that the skull is structured, is basically that of ancient Australasian people. You find that the earliest people in East Asia also were considered to be proto-Australoids. All of this is easily checked. People can go away and look at that themselves. The proto-Australoids were sort of everywhere, and that they are definitely basal to all Eurasians. That they've come out of these proto-Australoids, and it's not just their genes and their skulls. In fact, there's a tribe in Brazil, one of the same tribes, off the top of my head, I don't remember the name of the tribe, but that one of the same tribes that has these ancient genes also has similar mythology, because they have, for example, the belief that when you look up at the sky, right, that along the dark rift of the Milky Way, there is a giant rhea, right, and this is a bird called a rhea, which is a large flightless bird, right, which is a close relative of the emu. And if you ask what the Aboriginals, you say, well, what kind of things do you see when you look up there? And it's a giant emu along the dark rift. Right. So you can tell me that's a coincidence, right? That you've got this like remote isolated jungle tribe who not only has genes from some ancient visitation or whatever of these Aboriginals, but even has their story of this giant emu spread along the Milky Way. I mean, it's not reasonable to say that those two things can be coincidental. So you've got contact with what was already an existing high culture that already had those astronomical understandings tens of thousands of years ago when it reached America, and passed that on to people there. So these are real world based ideas, not something where I just sit there and I think flight of fantasy. I think there's a connection. That these are established connections. They're being established by academics, but they're not putting them together into a broader context and sharing that with the public. They're providing people with isolated finds where they'll say, we found some genes of these people. And in a separate study, we found something over there. And so obviously there's a rush of media. The news comes out. You get this flash pan thing of that, the story's changed again. There's this. But you never really get that thing of, well, what is the current total picture based on all of these? And that's why people don't really know what the hell does all this mean? And that's why I've tried to put this together for people into one book. And as I say, there'll be other books which will basically bring those finds together, and then give people the context. And obviously my interpretation of the context, but with the source data, so you can decide for yourself whether perhaps I've misinterpreted it in some way, but you've got the data there. You can just go to the references, you can find the papers, you can look at them, and you can see, perhaps things that I haven't found as well, or reinterpret it. But either way, I'm not just saying, believe me, it's like this. I'm saying, look, these are the top academics in the world that I'm going to for this information, and I'm putting it together into a picture, and then it's up to the reader to decide, does that picture make sense?
And one topic that I did want to get into a little bit was this whole thing about giants. I understand you've actually went and looked for some bones before?
Yeah, back in 2014 or 13, I was involved with research of a site in the Amazon jungle. I was living in Ecuador at the time. There was a megalithic complex found there, a number of artifacts that appeared to be strange tools, amongst them some that were considered to be oversized hammers or giant hammers. And when I first heard of the place, the guy that told me about it, who had been on an expedition there that had kind of uncovered it, if you like, he described it as a lost city of giants. So that was how the place got its name. And anyone can Google Ecuador's lost city of giants. They'll find many articles and blogs that have covered that, and quite a lot of YouTube videos, and even the mainstream media, the Telegraph in the UK covered it, but more in the context of it being potentially an Inca site. But there's a lot out there about that. So anyway, I was sort of, I suppose the person that spent the most time and energy on investigating that, not only interviewing people that had been there, but researching about the area, and then did 2 direct expeditions myself into the site, and that, because that got media attention, basically I was contacted by the Science Channel, who were interested in going there and doing some filming, but what happened in the end is they chose to do an expedition into the Georgian Caucasus, because it's hard to carry your stuff into the jungle for a big swamp, basically. That's what it came down to, is that, it was going to be really difficult to do the filming. So they said instead, look, do you want to come with us? And we'll go up into the mountains in Georgia and go on this other search for giant bones involving some local researchers in Georgia. And that you'll be basically our English kind of speaking, like team leader, for this, because obviously everyone else was Georgian. And they wanted someone, I guess, with English as their first language, who had a sort of knowledge of the subject to kind of, be the front person. So I ended up, flying to Georgia and hiking up into the Caucasus with local researchers to uncover some bones of giants. They'd already found bones of giants, basically, and we were going back to see if there was more, and that these could then be, analysed. So we did this big hike into the Bajormi Karaguli National Park, which is vast, one of the biggest national parks in Europe. Unexploited forests, going up there into the mountains, and like this kind of stuff. There are wolves, bears, and all that. It's like the middle of nowhere, and going up, sort of hiking up into this mountain, and all the way along, once you got quite deep in, I was seeing, shaped blocks and things, like at the side of the paths and stuff, and it was quite apparent to me that at some point there had been some kind of high culture, in that deep national park. And the higher we got into the mountains, the more of that I was seeing. As someone who's been to ancient sites, you start to recognize what a carved block, that's fallen off of a wall or a building looks like. And there was multiple signs of that. And then eventually we got up to the top where there was a ruined temple, which is where these bones had been found. But there was complexities about, they hadn't really finalized the permits to do the proper dig. So they didn't do a full dig in the end. But there was another bone was supplied to us by somebody from the previous mission. They did date it. They tested it. They said that it was about 1,000 years old, I think it came to in the end, that these like 7 to 8 foot high people had been like living at this site. So they were within that historical period. But I can say that there were some other things up there that I don't think had anything to do with that historical period, because there was like blocks that were kind of made out of like a mixture of stones and bones all fused together. Wow. Something out of a horror movie, mate. That's all I can tell you, because I don't know who was there and what the hell was going on, but it was like something out of a horror movie, just these weird blocks of stone with pieces of bone melted and fused into them. And because the guy sort of said, look, come on, I'll show you something. There's more bones somewhere else. Because when it was going a bit wrong about the permits, and I thought, they're going to show me some like fox bones or something. I wasn't thinking it's going to be anything. And he showed me these things. It's just like, what the hell is that? It looked like the stones were fused together by melted bone, and then there was just pieces of bone just sticking out and stuff. And it's like, are you telling me someone was building with like bone? You know what I mean? Making blocks with bones and stones mixed together. I mean, I never heard of that anywhere else, really. I mean, that doesn't seem normal to me. It's pretty weird. And then there was the entranceway to what looked like a filled-in tunnel, and that also had this bone stone material around the lip of the tunnel. And there's a rumor that somewhere up in that area there is a buried giant that is like in a cavern in a sarcophagus or something. So I don't know if that tunnel was the entrance to that. But it's one of those sites that in the back of my mind I've always thought, one day, that has got to be dug up, because I don't know what's down in that tunnel, but that site is so super weird that, it really begs a full, expedition with ground penetrating radar and, like the full thing, because not only is it near that ruined temple that had giants, but it was just super weird. I'll be honest, one of the strangest feelings I ever had was being up there. And I think that there is legends of giants and stuff in Georgia. There's a whole thing about ancestry of like Noah and being connected to the area and the Great Flood and giants, and there's a whole huge mythology there of multiple kinds of giants. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they dug down into that tunnel, found some sort of weird sarcophagus with a giant in it. I'll just throw that out there. I mean, it was so weird, the whole site, the whole thing, that it's one of those sites that, if I could independently afford to just run an expedition, and bring all the kit, I would definitely go there with the LiDAR, the drones, the everything. And I think that there's something really extraordinary up on that mountain.
Yeah, the whole giant thing, it's always been super fascinating to me. There's people claiming that these remains and bones are taken away and hidden by museums and the government. And I don't really know about any of that, if it's true or not. Mm-hmm. But I do think that giants don't necessarily mean ancient aliens or anything supernatural, mm-hmm. because like you pointed out, with your whole thing, there were mm-hmm. many different groups of humanoid types back then. Maybe some of them were just very large. I don't think that's out of the question.
No, not only is it not out of the question, but there's evidence that actually suggests that, because I mean, there's been finds in South Africa of what's called Homo heidelbergensis, which is a kind of like now being recognised as an ancestor of Neanderthals, right? But there was a period down in South Africa around about, if I remember rightly, about somewhere around 400, 300,000 years ago, they reckon, where these, like a group of them or a population of them went through a period of gigantism, and that routinely that they were over 7 foot tall, and they found not only some like large bones, from these, but also oversized stone tools like giant stone axes and stuff. So it's not only like a reasonable thing to say. It is true that there's been periods where certain hominin groups have been giant sized, and 7 foot or so is typically the heights associated with what has been called giants in the giant research area. Usually they're about 7 or 8 foot tall, and they're not normally talking about people that are 10 foot or 15 foot or anything like that, not Jack and the Beanstalk type giants. For the most part, it's just been very tall people. And certainly in North America, where, finds have been made in burial mounds, it's about 7 foot, so we do know that is not that abnormal, for a member of the human family. So I don't really see any reason why there couldn't have been a population of abnormally tall humans that have become known as the giants. I mean, it's not that silly. I mean, obviously people have put onto the subject stuff that makes it sound silly, but not in itself being silly. And as I say, if there was two giant-sized people up in that burial on the mountain, that in itself is extraordinary. And as the show said, the odds of two people with like gigantism, being buried in the same place on the same mountain in the same sort of small country is like 1,000,000 to 1. So I mean, it does tend to suggest that maybe there was a population that, for whatever reason, was on average very tall. So I think that we shouldn't be so quick to just dismiss the whole thing as being a silly subject.
And the whole Gigantopithecus thing probably fits in somewhere because that would explain the whole Bigfoot thing.
Well, it could be, and again, they had legends there in Georgia of Bigfoot in the woods. So it's a fairly universal theme. They have the theme here as well in Australia. They have Yowie, which is another Bigfoot. So I mean, it's that story seems to be global. And obviously, when there's a global story, there's a root of truth in there somewhere. Like, we may not know what exactly that root is, but I don't think that that's a totally invented story. Because it's amazing that it's traveled the world and it's persevered all the way up to modern days, in pretty much all nations, from here to Tibet to Georgia to Americas. To me, there's obviously a kernel of truth in that story. Now, whatever that is, whether it's the memory of a creature that used to live or a time when people were bigger, whatever it is, I think that there's a reasonable explanation at the core of that story.
Yeah, this is also very fascinating. We've really gotten into it tonight. We've gone over the origins of the human race, or perhaps a more accurate picture, which is very contradictory to what most people out there have been taught all their lives. And I absolutely love this stuff, and I'm very grateful to be here with you, Bruce, now so early on in your writing career. What are some of these books that you're thinking about publishing in the future? I'm curious what types of topics you plan to talk about, because it sounds like you're going to go much deeper into the paranormal side of things.
Yeah, there's a good chance we will. I mean, my wife is actually a medium and a shaman, so I mean, I'd like to do some writing that will incorporate some of her work. And some of my obviously experiences in that area. So we'll almost certainly will do a co-authored book on the sort of shamanic side of things, at some point. But yeah, I do need to tidy up the Into America book, and also the other one, which will be a bit of an account of my adventures. I've been to a lot of places. I've been to to Egypt, Mexico. Obviously, I'm in Australia now. I've been around the megaliths of southwest England, and been out to Asia to the Khmer ruins and so. I mean, I'd like to put that into a kind of a narrative, non-fiction narrative kind of adventure. So that will hopefully be a book I'll get done next year. Into America is probably the first one, and then once I've done that, I may revisit my own sort of investigation of some of the more controversial claims in prehistory. So we'll have that's probably there. But I think after that, I would probably go back to the more paranormal type stuff, as I say, this sort of shamanic side of things, and look to write in that area as well. And I won't write off other topics. If as I find interesting things that come up, I guess if they're significantly fascinating and important, then I would write on them, So we'll see. But definitely, there will be, a delve back into the consciousness and psychic, shamanic, all of that side at some point. Because I've had so many of my own experiences, I can't dismiss it, because it'd be sort of like silly in a way if I then say, well, I can only write on academic type, stuff, because those are experiences that a lot of people are having. There's millions of us have been having them over, I imagine, probably millions of years. So it's a legitimate area of study and a legitimate area for people to understand more of. That will be the other area I go into.
And we are approaching the end of the interview, but I'd like to go ahead and just open things up for you one more time and give you an opportunity to just say whatever you'd like to say to my audience, and please follow that up with anything that you would like to plug.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say to everybody obviously, firstly, keep an open mind. Read articles with skepticism when you see these releases that come out from the mainstream saying, history's been rewritten again. Put that into a bit more of the context that I'm telling you, that although they're admitting that this rewrites things, what they actually in the end do is tend to just push those back in. They hammer them back into the same, the square peg into the round hole. So don't immediately think, oh yeah, they're changing it all, because they're not really. there's a tiny change and then they hammer it all back in. Obviously I'd like people to ideally take the time to get a hold of my book. It's at the moment, it's on a 30% reduction on Amazon. So it's like $6 something. So, I mean, if you look at the prices of all the other books on this subject area, you'll see that I'm doing my best to almost sort of give this away because I want people to know about it. Also, even if you're not going to read the book, support my work if you can, because it means I can get onto the other subjects that you're really interested in a lot faster. And also you can give the books away to people that, would enjoy it. That'll really help me because, if I have to spend my time 9 to 5 work, it'll take me a lot longer getting those other books out to you, and debunk and basically overthrowing this paradigm, which is what I'm aiming to do. I need a lot more support. So please, do consider getting the book for a friend or whatever. Visit my websites. I have ancientnews.net. I have brucefenton.info and also earthforall.net. So any of those you can find me on, and I'm on Twitter at Ancient News, as well as obviously Facebook. So I'm out there if you want to sort of connect with me. And again, I'd really appreciate any support, sharing my work, getting people involved. I'm not very famous compared to, some of the other people in this area, but my work is really important. I can see that we need to fight back against the dogmatic paradigm that has all of us basically within it. So please help.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, please go out and buy Bruce R. Fenton's book. And don't think that I did not notice that you are offering that book at a very reasonable price. I went on to Amazon and I saw that. So I definitely hats off to you for making that so affordable to all of us and to have this type of work so affordable, because there's a lot of books out there that are much more on the woo side of things that they charge $40 for.
Absolutely. I mean, I've looked at, especially Kindle, as you know. I mean, my books generally, I have it set at $2.99. I think it's at $3 something because of Amazon or whatever. But you look around and you see most of the big names, in our genre, their Kindle books even are like $20 and stuff, $15, $10, and there's no real cost in printing it. So, I mean, they're obviously, I know that's the publishers more than the researchers, so I'm not blaming them, but, I am making this really accessible because I think that that's like quite expensive to get, which often what is actually you're getting is rehashing of old stories and stuff. And that, I am providing something that is new, novel, important, and could potentially change the whole paradigm. And I'm trying my best for it to be, available to anyone, and again, as the print version at $6 something at the moment. So, and with Christmas coming up, buy a couple of copies through, because I don't see other people giving their books, away at that kind of price. So, and that is intentional. I would like it to actually reach people, not just fund my life. I'd like people to actually know about this.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for appearing on the show tonight, Bruce. I definitely want to stay in touch, and why don't we do this again in the future?
Great. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. We can go into some other sides of things. Thanks so much. Yeah, and I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for listening.
You have a good night, my friend.
Okay. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. And there you have it. That was Bruce R. Fenton. Check him out on Amazon. You've got to remember to put the R in there, because if you Google just Bruce Fenton, you'll get all kinds of people that are not him. So keep that in mind. Boy, what a fascinating interview, because that is what we do here on End of Days Radio. This is a show where we go much further into the void, into the darkness of space. If there is even a space, who knows? Perhaps the Earth is flat even. What do we really know? I like to explore anything that goes against the grain. I like to explore anything that offers ideas that are unconventional and might help open our minds or see things from a different perspective, because that's what we all are really here on Earth. We are humans, we are explorers, we are experiencing a journey into our own selves and the world around us, and it's very exciting. I do want to take a little bit of a break. I've got a lot to talk about. I've got quite a bit to talk about. I've had all kinds of things happen and heard all kinds of feedback from you guys, and I got to get into it, and I've got all these news stories and letters, and oh boy, it's going to be quite the night. So stay tuned. I'm going to play some music, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes. and welcome back to End of Days Radio. This is your host, Daniel, broadcasting to you from the beautiful Seattle, Washington, here on the Pacific Coast, the Pacific Northwest, right here. Oh, wow, there's so much to talk about. I don't even know where to start. I think what I want to do, though, is first tell you guys, or remind you guys, that you can call in at 209-348-9810. That's 209-348-9810. Or you can add Ninja Shoe 777 on Skype. And I also want to begin this part of the show. This is the after interview period. I like to call it wrap up or the news section or fan roundtable. There's so many different ways we've described this portion of the show, but no description really seems perfect. It just is what it is. It's End of Days Radio. We're very loose. And I don't mean loose in a Kim Kardashian way. I mean loose as in we could do anything at any time. No offense to Kim Kardashian. She has a very nice rear end. It's very big. I've heard that it's Photoshopped, but perhaps in some cases fantasy is better than reality. I'm going to go ahead and read a letter from one of you lovely End of Days Radio listeners out there. This is a long-time listener and friend of the show, Woozy. He wrote in and he says, "Yo, Daniel, how are you doing? Great shows. I listen to it when I'm working. I'm a delivery guy, and it's fun to listen to your show instead of music all day. So I must say that I like the longer shows. When I see it under 2 hours, I'm kind of bummed. Smiley face. Not a complaint, it's a compliment. Smiley face. Anime is awesome. Whoever thinks it's for kid is old, and old is boring, so feel sorry for them. Smiley face. Have a great end of the year days. Greeting, Woozy." Thanks, Woozy. That means quite a bit to me. How kind of you. How kind. I do really like to do this show. I do like to keep it very loose. I do like to make it a longer show, but there are reasons why the show became shorter. I was thinking more shows that are shorter would be better for various reasons. A lot of it had to do with my schedule, so that factors into things. I do have to work, like most of you human beings out there who aren't inheriting tons of money or who aren't trophy wives of some capacity and just stay home all day and spend their husband's money, or vice versa. What do you call them? Gigolos who just stay home all day and spend their wife's money. I'm not one of those people. I work for a living. I'm a real man. I'm Dan. I'm the DAN. I'm the all-American man. I work for a living. I'm a blue-collar guy just like all of you out there. Don't forget that. So, yeah, my schedule does play into things, and there was a while where I was doing shows that could be as short as 2 hours or even an hour and 45 minutes. And I've gotten a lot of feedback about those, and in general, people seem to prefer a longer show. Yes, you End of Days Radio listeners out there, you seem to like these long shows. I thought that perhaps it was holding the show back. I was going too long. People don't want to hear me run my mouth for too long. People don't want to hear super long interviews. I was wrong. They do. Just like I was wrong about the cussing and the swearing. You guys informed me that you actually love when I start screaming cunt, 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 and do things of that nature. I'm not going to try to explain it. It seems to go against conventional thinking, but this is the End of Days Radio audience, and you wants what you want. I'm going to give you what you got's coming. You wants what you want, and I'm going to give you what you got's coming. So let's give a big fuck you to Wall Street right there, or fuck you to the man, fuck you to the system, fuck you to the powers that be holding us down all the time. It is time for a revolution in human thought and consciousness. It's not going to be a violent revolution. It's going to be an info war. Like our buddy Alex Jones and all of his loony sort of promos that he cuts. Who knows if he's a disinfo agent or if he isn't? Perhaps he's just a man. Perhaps he's not. Who knows? But this is indeed an info war, and we are fighting back with information. They make a move, we make a move. It's a game of chess. It's Machiavellian. It's the art of war. Yeah. Okay. Anyways. So, we are going to try to do longer shows here. I mean, I figure you guys... I'll do a show week. And rather than try to force 2 shows in there, or try to force... try to make a lot of shows work. Why not just do a long show, and then you guys have a whole week to listen to it? Sometimes 2 weeks. Because this show does go on break. I mean, I think 1 show a week is enough if it's a long show, isn't it? I know there's other podcasts out there that you want to listen to. I know that there's Netflix shows that you got to listen to. So if I can occupy just 1 slot in your otherwise busy schedule and your busy life, I'm grateful. And I'll try to make it long for you hardcore fans out there that want a lot of content. I'm not going to go on air if I don't have anything to talk about. I mean, I'm not going to throw crap at the wall. I'm not an ape or a proto-human or a Homo erectus sitting here throwing my poop against the wall. Did Homo erectus even do that? I find it ironic that his name is Homo erectus, and all of a sudden the Homo erectuses spread around the earth very quickly and rapidly, almost like they're a bunch of horny Homo erectuses. You got to give props to that particular lineage of proto-humans for their quick spreading out. I do love that name, Homo erectus. It just sounds funny, right? Homo sapien. Homo erectus is superior to Homo sapien. Okay. Enough of proto-humans. They are important, but there's much to talk about. I do have a letter from a lady who did not like last show very much. We are going to get into some news, but I've got 1 more letter to throw at you. She did not like the guest, and she did not like the fact that I allowed this guest to come on and tell her story. And I invited this person to come on and give and do a rebuttal on error if she wanted to, exercise her free speech, or exercise this platform called End of Days Radio, which is all about that. But she chose instead to just leave a comment on YouTube. But I will go ahead and read it, because she seems like she wants to do some kind of rebuttal. So this is in regards to the last show with Cheryl Wilkinson and the disappearance of Corey McKeague. This person is none of your business, and she is leaving a comment as a rebuttal to Cheryl Wilkinson's appearance on my last show. Okay, I'm going to read it now. This woman is a complete fantasist. I did not hear one true fact within that interview. She was not hacked and is a laughingstock over on Reddit. Gang stalking my arse. It's England. She says arse. And where the hell she gets those facts from that his family have pushed the Flex story is wrong. They have kept a completely open mind, and his mom has never once said that she did not think he had the phone on him. As for the info she says that was leaked over on Reddit, she was behind most of it, along with the other 2 mods that run the now private threads. They get info from family and are friendly with them. But it's not the mom's side, it's the dad's side. I'm pretty sure that Cheryl did say that. As for the old threads that she claims you can no longer access, she is wrong. And it's all there on archive.is. All the proof of her and her ridiculous hacking tale, which is what made her stop posting. She could not have been locked out of Reddit when she was still replying to the messages of a few other posters weeks later. Her excuse for not posting was that she had stopped following the case. I'm up to 1 hour in the interview, and I don't know whether to laugh or scream at how mad this woman is. Okay, so that's another perspective on the whole thing. And of course, I don't mean any disrespect to Cheryl Wilkinson for reading that. I am simply reading a letter that I got sent to me. This is not my opinion. I'm just reading it as to be fair to the other side, since this other person claims that was so wrong of me to have her on the show. But I have to say that I don't really see anything that makes me doubt what Cheryl Wilkinson had to say. She seemed to be very objective about the whole thing and present a lot of theories as well as her personal account, and I don't see any evidence that what she's claiming is false. We can assume that they're false, but we don't really know that. But I do welcome anybody, if they have some kind of problem with anything that was said on this show, if you want to write in, if you want to call in, that's fine. You can do that. The call-in number is 209-348-9810. You can call in anytime. You can call in even when the show is not on air. And maybe if you leave me a message on Skype, I'll even, because that number goes to my Skype line. So I will play it on air if you wish. Just let me know. It's up to you. Do what you're going to do. The Seahawks, Sunday, defeated the number one team in the National Football League, the NFL. A lot of our players are incapacitated. They're out. And it wasn't looking good. It wasn't looking good. We did not think that we would beat the Eagles, the Philadelphia Eagles. It was looking very bleak, but somehow we pulled it off. In the Battle of the Birds, we smashed the Eagles. Smashed. Sorry, you fans from Philadelphia, but you were smashed. Playoff hopes are looking up. If you're not a football fan, I apologize. I am a fan of those Hawks. And I have to throw my support out there, even though many of you probably just don't give a damn. But I do think that we can all enjoy football. The Super Bowl is one of the most watched things, period. I think that says a lot to how exciting the game can be. I know it's very dangerous. A lot of those guys get concussions, and sometimes people even die playing football. People die in boxing rings. People die doing cheerleading. Did you guys know that? Did you know that cheerleaders die all the time? When they toss them up in the air, sometimes they land and nobody catches them. Yeah, or they fall off the top of the pyramid. That's more dangerous than playing football. That's more dangerous than doing boxing or MMA. Yet nobody really bats an eye to this incredibly dangerous sport of cheerleading, and nobody tells them to stop doing the pyramids or tossing each other 20 feet in the air. It's all very statusy and very tied into the way that our society and our schools are set up. It's considered to be a status symbol to be a cheerleader, and they cover up all the grisly death and destruction that happens in those high school gym practices. If you're in high school and you listen to this show, maybe you should do something. Maybe you should talk your friends out of doing that. Okay. And moving on from the deadly sport of cheerleading, I did kind of want to talk about the idea. Oh, you know what? Let's do a news story. I'm sorry. This is too early for me to start going into these topics that I like to talk about. I've got some news stories here. We cannot skip the news. Oh my God. I apologize. This news story comes from express.co.uk. I believe that we may have gotten news stories from this website before. This is a weird publication that comes out of the UK. It doesn't claim to be weird in any way, but they always seem to have these strange UFO stories and these strange stories in general. This one says, proof of Rendlesham, ? U.S. airman who saw UFO and aliens, in quotes, at airbase passes a lie detector. A key witness in the mysterious Rendlesham UFO case has reportedly sailed through a lie detector after insisting he saw alien beings floating beneath a triangle craft during the bizarre encounter. Yep, that whole Rendlesham UFO story is so weird, and really, in my opinion, probably one of the best cases that can vindicate and be provided as evidence of this entire UFO aliens thing. There's so many different accounts of what happened there from so many different people that were involved, and the fact that it happened, I believe it happened on a military base, didn't it? Or it was close. Rendlesham Forest. I think that because of where it happened and how many saw it, this is one of the big pieces of proof that we have of the whole thing. The Rendlesham Forest incident. How many people know about that? How many of your friends do? How many of them know about the Phoenix Lights? How many people are really educated on this stuff? We have YouTube, but are people watching those videos or are they watching South Park streams? What's more popular? And don't get me wrong, I love South Park, but it's amazing how little people know about this stuff and what has happened. Is it too weird? Why don't more people talk about this stuff? Instead, we're all worried about what Donald Trump did next, or what he did last, or what he's going to do next. It seems that everybody these days is obsessed with Donald Trump and sexual harassment between celebrities and famous people. Those are really the only things you hear on the news lately. That's why we do this. That's why we do our news here on End of Days Radio. I do have another story. Don't think that's it. Don't think that that's all. Don't think that that is all the news I have for you, little lovelies out there. This comes from avclub.com. Interesting site. I might have to explore this place later. It says, never forget, Taylor Swift is actually an Illuminati clone of Anton LaVey's daughter. So this article claims, and it's got a picture of them two, it's got a picture of the two of them next to each other. It claims that Taylor Swift is a clone of Anton LaVey's daughter. I guess because they're both blonde, and they both have skinny eyebrows, and they wear makeup. I suppose that she's a clone. I'm looking at the pictures side by side. I have to say the chin definitely looks different. And why would they need to clone her? She's the daughter of Anton LaVey, but I don't think she has any powers or anything like that, does she? Why would they need to clone her? And why would they need to make that clone into a celebrity? Is it some kind of... I don't get it. I don't get the thinking behind that. I know that a lot of these people are from particular bloodlines, but still, I have to say that this most likely is disinfo or just a bored journalist trying to get attention, or a poor excuse for a journalist. I just don't think so. That's just... I have an open mind, but come on. Come on. What would be the point? That Church of Satan is interesting, I have to say. It's strange how they always seem to talk about how they don't believe in God or things that are mystical, and then you find out they're doing all these rituals. Why would you practice magic or do rituals if you don't believe in spirituality or things like that? That doesn't make much sense to me. I think that's a much more interesting discussion than claiming that Taylor Swift is Anton LaVey's daughter. Sorry, but that's just stupid. Dumb. No offense to the author of that article. It seems that nowadays a lot of guys out there have this desire to be perceived as an alpha male. And what is an alpha male? An alpha male would be like the silverback of the group of gorillas, or the leader dog in a pack of dogs. The idea is that if you are perceived as a leader, if you appear to be a very dominant person, very confident, that you will be perceived as superior to other males by females and by males and by everybody. It seems that you hear a lot of celebrities talking about being an alpha male or calling other guys beta males. You tend to hear stuff like that. It seems to be part of our culture now, this concept of being an alpha male. And I think that it's probably not very scientifically accurate, and it's kind of a shitty way of thinking, because you are walking around trying to be better than other people. Basically, if you think of yourself that way, it certainly makes you seem a little insecure if you have to prove to other people that you're an alpha male. If you have to present an image that you're superior, or you're tougher, or you're this or you're that than people around you. And to just call yourself that, that's kind of douchey, isn't it? It sounds really immature and insecure, doesn't it? I'd say that it's probably not a good way of looking at things. I think that a much better way of looking at things, instead of trying to be an alpha male, why not try to be a god? Right? Like the whole EA co-editing thing. Why try to be some fake person trying to look tough or look cool in today's society? Why are you trying to be a leader amongst your small group of douchebag friends when you could be a god? Wouldn't it be much better to be a god? And isn't that what we all really are deep down? Aren't we just parts of God experiencing this world and reality from many different perspectives? Isn't that what we really are? Just little sparks of that God spark, or that all spark like they'd call it in Transformers. Isn't that what it's really all about? Realizing that you are a god on some level, and waking up from these chains of deception and perceptual illusions. I'd say that's a lot better than being an alpha male. Just be yourself. Be yourself. Just don't give a fuck what people think. Don't plan out how you're going to present yourself to people. Don't even think about it. Just be you. And that is way better than trying to be an alpha male, I think. Now, some of you are going to judge me for this, I'm sure. But I have been thinking about digging through trash cans. What are you talking about, Daniel? You're crazy. Why would you dig through a trash can? Well, I've been watching these videos on YouTube where people find crazy shit in dumpsters. Like they find guitars that are worth 20 grand, or they find stuff that got thrown away from a store, or they find all this valuable shit. It just shows you that one person's trash is another person's treasure. And by digging through dumpsters, you could find treasure. I mean, it's not like you're digging through shit. There shouldn't be any shit in there, right? But doesn't that sound kind of fun? To go go around at night and break into dumpsters and steal trash that nobody wants anyway. It's not stealing. It's not stealing. It's stuff that they're throwing away. It's disgusting how people litter and trash up the planet. There's nothing wrong with taking something that's getting thrown away anyways, right? So why not dig through dumpsters? Why not find treasure buried that other people don't want? That sounds fun to me. That's almost like being Indiana Jones and searching for treasure and mysteries without actually having to go into the jungle or go into the Temple of Doom. I think that anytime you can find adventure, why not pursue it? Whether you're into skydiving or exploring caves or exploring underground cities full of homeless people, do what you want to do. Do what's fun. I even heard that there's people that put on night vision goggles and run around and film it at nighttime. And it's not like they're doing anything productive. They're just running around and having fun. I think they call it night ops. And there's other people that go around and explore weird places, like they explore abandoned missile silos and things like that. There's a lot of adventure out there. I think part of what it is I did not get married young. I did not start a family and have all this responsibility and weight on my shoulders at an early point in my adult life. And for those of you out there, it's nothing against you guys. I mean, that's how you choose to live your lives. You wanted to have a family right away. But I didn't do that. I'm unmarried. I don't have any kids. So I have time where I can have adventure, where I can explore. I have that freedom because I'm not tied down by those sort of responsibilities. I'm not saying I'm better or my way is right or it's better. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is how my life has gone. So I have no attachments that keep me from exploring. And I can use that time to play guitar or read books about weird things or put on a podcast. So be glad. Be glad. You don't have to live a cookie cutter life or do things just like everybody else. Do you guys really think that marriage is always even going to be around? I mean, society has changed quite a bit, and there's so much divorce. Is it really always going to be around? I mean, do you even need a legal form of marriage? Can't you just jump over a broom together and just be together and be together as long as it lasts? I don't know. Some people really go for the traditional. I get that. Who wants to see the world radically change right before their eyes constantly? People get set in their ways. But things change, and things seem to change quick. Look at how things were back in the 60s. People were wearing bell-bottoms, for Christ's sakes. Or was that the 70s? I don't even know. I wasn't alive back then. All I've got is Wikipedia and YouTube. I have no time machine. But if I did, that would be great. It'd be like Doctor Who, right? Yes, I am still watching Dragon Ball Super. I talked about Dragon Ball Super last show. And I'm continuing to watch it. Yeah, I know, I'm a big geek. But the first so many episodes, I watched the dubbed versions that had all the English voices on there, but those ran out and I had to start watching the subtitle versions. And it's good. I mean, it's addicting. It has everything that makes Dragon Ball addicting. Freaking awesome battles, transformations, humor. If you are a fan of anime or Dragon Ball, or you watch Dragon Ball Z, and you still have not gotten on the Dragon Ball Super bandwagon, now's the time, baby. Now's the time. You can watch it fucking for free online. Why wouldn't you? You can watch almost anything for free online anymore if you know where to look. So why don't you? Dragon Ball Super, everybody. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to all the real men and women out there who own up to their mistakes instead of blaming others and acting cowardly and playing the blame game. Do you have people like that in your workplace? Do you have people that play the blame game? They never admit to their own faults, but they always blame others and throw other people under the bus. It's so selfish, isn't it? And every workplace seems to have people like that. And it just makes people lose respect in you, lose respect for you, so don't do that. Don't play the blame game, and don't kiss butt. Don't suck up to your bosses. Don't suck up to your managers, because, trust me, it's pointless. If you are rewarded for sucking up, then you're in the wrong place, because people that have integrity, if they know that somebody's sucking up to them, they're just going to dislike that person. It's not going to make them like you more. When you suck up, it doesn't make people like you more. It makes them lose respect for you. So just be yourself. And don't kiss any butt. Don't suck any dong. You don't need knee pads. You don't need lip gloss. You don't need any of that stuff. Don't suck up. Don't suck up to your friends either. Everybody's the same. Everybody's equal. We are all gods. Seriously, though, don't suck up. A lot of us out there in the world are different. We are the misfits. This is the island of misfit toys here on End of Days Radio. We're an island of misfit toys. We are the island of misfit toys. Blah, blah, girls. Blah, blah, boys. A squirt gun that squirts jam, and a train with square wheels, a lion with wings, and a jar of some dills, because Christmas time is here. That's how that song goes, right? From Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That's what we are. We are the misfits of society. We are the outcasts. We are the freaks and geeks, the wannabes and sneaks. We are the ones who take peeks. But it's hard being different. Hey, I know this. It's hard. It's easy to fit in. It's easy to like yourself if you were handed everything from an early age. But for some people, it's not that easy. For most people, it's not that easy. Life can sometimes be a journey of learning to love yourself. It can be hard. And especially if you're into things that are weird like this. Aliens. Demons. Ghosts and goblins. Illuminati. Psychic abilities. I mean, you start talking about that stuff, and let's face it, people are going to think you're weird. It's true. There's no reason to not admit it. It's the elephant in the room, right? This is why people don't like to get into this stuff, because they're afraid of what people think. Right? It's true. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before. I think that David Icke, to quote him, he put it best when he does that comparison to a germ in the body, right? A germ is in the body and all the white blood cells start attacking it. That's what happens when you're in society and you go against the grain. You get attacked. People are shallow creatures. And if you're different, you will get attacked. Whether you're a different race or you're a mutant, whatever it is. Do you guys read the X-Men comics? You get what's going on in there with the mutants and Professor X and the people getting persecuted? They're being attacked because they're different. Yes. If you listen to this show, chances are that you are different. you are different too. But be proud of who you are, because it's good to be different. Why would you think otherwise? It's not easy. It's not the easy path. But I can guarantee you, you're going to have a more interesting life than those people that got to deal with the dirty diapers at a young age. The people that follow the cookie cutter path, you're probably going to have more fun. And don't be afraid to explore that side of yourself. That different side of yourself. Don't be afraid. I like to think that I contribute the most to the world when I'm being an artist. When I'm creating some kind of artwork. I consider this show to be artwork. I consider anything artwork that or most things artwork that I'm not getting paid for. I mean, we can get really obsessed with our careers and obsessed with making money and obsessed with the so-called real world and getting ahead. But we're not contributing anything to the world. When we create art, that's when we're really contributing. And the system wants to shut that down because it takes money to live in this world. And most people don't get paid for their art. Only a few lucky ones. So there's not that incentive there. The matrix, the material world, society seems to want to keep us from expressing that side of ourselves. That creative side of ourselves. That part of us that is creative. That stuff comes from that God spark inside all of us. And that's why the matrix and the system wants to suppress that side of us. You're welcome. I just made you a little smarter. Also, don't feel bad if you are out there trying to get things going for yourself. If you're trying to be successful. If you're trying to make money so that you can have less stress in your life and feel good about yourself and have a nicer house and a nicer car. Don't feel bad if you're not there yet. And don't give up. Because I know a lot of you out there, you're frustrated because it's not happening fast enough for you. You start to get ahead. You encounter some kind of obstacle or roadblock. Or you have some kind of setback. Realize that a setback is just a setback. Keep your compass pointed in the right direction. Focus on your goals. Focus on what you want. And you will get it. Keep moving in the right direction. And you'll be fine. You don't have to work that hard, really. Work smart. Don't work hard. But keep focused in a positive direction. And you'll get there. You will have that success. Don't expect it to come all at once because that's not why you're here. You're here to get bumped around and bruised. You're here to learn things and experience. But you'll get there. If that's what you really want, you'll get there. So relax, because getting all wound up and frustrated isn't going to get you there any faster. When you're relaxed, when you're positive, that's when you make those connections. That's when you're more able to make it happen. Whatever it may be to you. Do what thou wilt. We got to get back into the magic, right? We've done all kinds of shows lately, but we've been neglecting the magical world, haven't we? Or maybe we haven't. No, we have. Seriously. We got to get back into that. And I'm probably going to be doing more shows on my own. Or not probably, I am. So there are going to be shows where it's just me. And even though we did do a holiday special that was kind of like a Halloween, Thanksgiving show, I do probably want to do a Christmas show too. Because I love Christmas. And what better time to do a show with just me and no guest and to celebrate Christmas with the people that I love the most, my End of Days Radio family. You lovely people out there that make me feel so happy about providing you with this show. This show about a boy in a world of craziness. This show about a boy named Daniel. Oh boy, I think that we almost forgot something, didn't we? We almost forgot the mind-blowing moment of the day, but we are not forgetting, are we? That's right. It's time. Hold on, I need to grab my maraca. It's time. It's time. It's time for that mind-blowing moment of the day. Wow, man. That's fucking crazy, man. You're blowing my mind, man. Put it away, man. Stop. You're blowing my mind. Too many drugs. No, I'm just kidding. No drugs. Ugh. But I'm going to say that the mind-blowing moment of the day would have to be when our guest, Bruce R. Fenton, he mentioned the psychic stuff at the beginning. I thought that was freaking cool. I mean, wow. Haven't I been telling you guys? Haven't I been telling you? Right? I've been telling you that psychic powers are real. Yes, I'm talking about Professor X. I'm talking about Jean Grey. I'm talking about Cable. I'm talking about psychic powers being real. Oh, he's crazy. Daniel's crazy. There he goes again. He's crazy. He's being crazy. I still listen, but he's crazy. No, I'm not. And stop with that. Psychic powers are real, and they always have been. You're psychic, and you always have been. Duh. Psychic abilities are real. And we've explored that a lot on this show. If you want to dig through the archives, if you listen to the live stream that just cycles the show 24/7, that's at endofdaysradio.com, by the way. We talk about psychic abilities quite a bit. We've even had a couple people on here that work with so-called special children that may or may not be alien hybrids. They might be, they might not. Who have these abilities. They're real. It's been proven so many different ways. What about the remote viewing program that the military sponsored? Just one of the occult type of things that governments have been into in the past. And it goes way, way back. I don't care if you don't believe it or not. It's true. We are all connected. We are all one. I don't know how it works. How is it that in the world of physics you can have two particles on opposite ends of the universe, yet somehow they're linked? Yeah, exactly. I just smartphoned you. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, what else do we have here? I do want to do some traveling. So many of you are always, you're always like inviting me to visit with you and come to your areas and do this and do that. And I'm always so focused on the stuff that I have right here. Like I'm focused on training, or I'm focused on the guitar. This show obviously always comes first, or my career outside of the show, things like that. I'm always focused on them, and it's hard for me to pull myself away from that stuff and just relax and go on a vacation. But I'm going to do it. I want to visit some of yous out there. I want to go visit you. I want to go to your hometown. I want to eat dinner and break bread with your family. If you would have me, perhaps we can wash each other's feet. Perhaps we can go explore some underground bases. Perhaps we can solve some unsolved cases. I just rhymed. But I do want to go visit you in your areas. I do want to have fun. I do want to get to know you. We can drink wine. I don't smoke pot. I'll eat it with you if you would like, so long as it's legal in your area. Otherwise, we have to keep it a secret between you and me. I'll come to you, and we can play some Double Trouble. We can play some Stratego. We can play some Mousetrap. Perhaps we can play one of these H.P. Lovecraft board games. We can play Magic cards. But let's do it. Let's hook up. I don't know when I'll be able to come visit you in your particular area, but I got to take a vacation sometime. So I do plan on getting out and perhaps doing some stuff on YouTube. Who knows? We have a certain amount of time on this planet. I'm not going to waste it. I do have one more letter to read for you guys before we call things to an end tonight. I promised you that we would do longer shows, and that's what we're going to do. We're hitting the 3-hour mark, and that's 3 hours with just one break in the middle, 10-minute break. Otherwise, that's 3 hours commercial free, which is probably evidence to 6 hours. I mean, not evidence. It's probably equivalent to 6 hours on terrestrial radio when you have traffic, when you have news, when you have commercials every so often. So just remember that. And if you have this show in podcast form, or you listen to this show in podcast form, then there is no break even. It's only a break for the live people. Shout out to you live listeners out there. Dear Daniel, my girlfriend left me for one of my friends. Now they kiss in front of me all the time, showing off, and now I want to put a big fat bullet in my head. That's from Andre. Andre, what are you doing? Don't put a bullet in your head. You don't want to do that, trust me. There's no coming back from that. That does sound a little mean, that your girlfriend and one of your friends are kissing in front of you. I guess she would not be your girlfriend anymore. That would be tough to deal with. I gotta admit, I would not want to have to deal with that. But I have to say that if they're doing that in front of you, are they really your friends? I don't think friends mentally torture their friends. I don't think that anybody who really likes you in their heart is going to use a connection that you had with somebody to hurt you like that. I don't think that she should be doing that. That's mean, and it sounds like she's playing games and trying to mentally torture you, or somehow it makes her feel good to get all this emotion from you. It sounds like some kind of emotional vampirism or something of that nature. I don't know why she would be doing that to you. Maybe the situation is that you all hang out together. Could that be it? Perhaps you should not hang out with them. Maybe you should find different friends or a different group of friends to hang around, because they don't seem like they're very nice people. That's just not very nice. But don't put a bullet in your head because of a couple stupid, immature little shitheads. That would be terrible. Just let them be shitheads, move on with your life, and it will make you all the stronger, and you will learn how to avoid nasty little game-playing bitches like her. So, Andre, put down that gun. Take those bullets out. Or keep them in there and put a trigger lock on that thing, because... Or just get past this whole shit about hurting yourself. What's wrong with you? Why would you hurt yourself for them? Think about that. You are a god. You are immortal. You are a god. Why would a god want to kill itself? That makes no sense. You're gonna go into purgatory and you're gonna have a shitty time. You're gonna reincarnate. So don't do that. Don't stifle your progress by entertaining these thoughts of hurting your vessel here in this world. Thank you all for listening tonight. I do love all of you. You are the light in my life. Truly. And without you, there would be no End of Days Radio. So thank you. If you enjoy the show, remember to go to endofdaysradio.com, where you can stay updated on all things End of Days Radio. Next week, we will be once again joined by V from the Red Pill Hardcore podcast. We're going to get updated with him and find out what he's been up to. I hope he's not still being gang stalked and harassed and hacked. So many of my guests seem to have those issues. We did lose our Skype connection earlier. I'm sure that's just a normal error. But this show has indeed come under attack. I have come under attack. But I'll fight back. Because when I'm on the attack, I fight back. I gotta stop that stupid rhyming. I apologize. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. But if you love End of Days Radio and you would like to help support the show, you can go to endofdaysradio.com and click that PayPal donate button. Donate $5, $10. I thank you so very much for helping me keep the servers up, keep the lights on, and keep on rocking in the free world. Because it is all about freedom to me. I do believe in America. Perhaps we do indeed have a corrupt government. Perhaps we are indeed materialistic, shallow people here in America, but I still say that at the end of the day, we are about freedom here. So shout out to America, home of the free and home of the brave. And shout out to all of you out there, outside of America, in your homes, in the countries that you reside. You are on my side, even still. Even though you do not live in America, perhaps where you live is even better. Perhaps you live in a country like Iceland, who has solved some of these issues with the big banks and things of that nature. We all seem to have our own struggles, regardless of where we are at. This is the Trump administration, and it's been very interesting to say the least. And I could probably go on and on about that, but I won't because we are out of time. And even though I don't want to, I'm probably going to run up to McDonald's and eat some big, fat, greasy burgers and fries with lots of ketchup. Maybe I'll get some chicken nuggets. Eat like shit. It'll be great for you. Don't eat like shit. Don't go to McDonald's. This is just a cheat day. It's an exception. And I'm going to never go back there again after tonight, of course. Good night, everybody. Once again, I love you. You love me. We are one happy fucking family. Yes, just like Barney, that big purple gay dinosaur. Oh, wait, hold on. He wasn't gay, was he? Just because he was purple. We don't know that. He was a man in a suit. Is Barney even on anymore? No, wait, hold on a second. Barney was never considered gay, was he? That was Big Bird. Poor Big Bird. And I think the purple Teletubby was always getting called all kinds of names. But you don't see that anymore, do you? Because the world has become so much more PC. And that may be for the better, indeed. But thank you for joining us here on End of Days Radio, for joining me, Daniel. I do broadcast from here once a week, here in my location in Seattle, Washington. I'm actually broadcasting from the Space Needle, from a hidden room in the Space Needle. No, I'm just joking. I do not broadcast from the Space Needle. I broadcast from my garage, as many of you know. It does get creepy in here sometimes. Occasionally I have a spider walk across the wall that's the size of a frickin' hand. Looks like something straight out of the Aliens movies. The face huggers. I believe they call them Washington House spiders. But join us next week talking to V from the Red Pill Hardcore. Until then, I am Daniel, and I wish you a good night. This is the End of Days, and have a good night. Yes, yes, yes.
winter's coming.
The king has returned from the broken ruins of Babylon. This is the end of day.